Chapter 1042. Boss, is it really okay for you to teach them how to make roast chicken? Will they steal our business? Yarbemia asked worriedly. It's okay. Isn't it interesting to let more people learn how to make delicious food? Meg shook his head with a smile. Business is endless. If the customers who can't afford to eat the beggar's chicken in our restaurant can eat the same delicious and cheap roast chicken that they make, that's pretty good too. Meg was very open-minded about this. Moreover, the positions of the two were completely different. Mammis was a high-end restaurant, and it had already rejected many salaried customers. Meg wanted to make money, and he used the high-end ingredients provided by the system. He didn't feel guilty about setting the price of the dishes. Delicacies made with the best ingredients were indeed worth the price. However, he didn't mind letting more ordinary people taste different delicacies. Therefore, he didn't hesitate to give some advice to the Orc brothers. As for how much they could learn and what kind of roast chicken they could make, that would depend on their own abilities. It was impossible for Meg to teach them how to make beggar's chicken step by step since they were open for business. After the girls finished eating the beggar's chicken, they went forward to help clean up the kitchen utensils. Only Gina carefully gathered the broken eggshells together and held them in her arms. She looked at Meg with a pleading expression and said, I want, Gina, do you still want to eat this mud casing? Meg looked at Gina. Last night, she carried a mud casing upstairs as supper. Now, she was carrying another mud casing and refusing to put it down. Those who didn't know better would think that he was abusing his employees. Or did she have pica? Yes. Gina nodded and then shook her head. She pointed to her mouth and waved her hand. Then, she pointed to the upper floor and made a gesture of keeping it. You want to keep it? Meg was even more confused. What kind of collecting hobby was this? Yes. Gina nodded with a bright smile on her face. Looking at Gina's pure and bright smile, Meg couldn't bring himself to reject her. He could only nod helplessly and say, keep it then. The effect of dominating the gourmet cuisine rankings was even more exaggerated that night. Even before it was time to open for business, the long line at the entrance of Amy's had already doubled 3 times in the plaza. There were at least 700 to 800 people. Today's roast chicken duel at noon caused Mammis' reputation to undergo a reversal. Some passers-by also spontaneously started to speak up for Mammy. Excluding those who are here to watch the show, the maximum number of guests tonight can only be 400. MIA, tell the guests who are queuing after 400 to disperse. They won't be able to eat even if they continue queuing. Meg looked at the long line outside and frowned. He didn't like such a lively scene. Most of the customers who came today were here for something new, but the old regulars had lost their seats. However, he couldn't say anything. The restaurant didn't have a reservation system. First come, first served was the rule. No matter how familiar the customers were, they still had to line up. All right. Yarbemia went out with a sign and ordered 400 people. Then, she placed the sign next to the 400th customer and started to persuade the customers behind to give up. It's this restaurant, right? It's definitely right. Otherwise, why would there be so many fools queuing up? Our king said that this boss is good at cooking. We should capture him and bring him back to cook for us every day. Hey, King's idea is pretty good. In the corner, 2 Minotaur demons looked at Mammis and muttered softly. Their eyes flashed with excitement. However, there are so many people. How are we going to make a move? King asked us to keep a low profile and not make a big deal out of it. Are you stupid? There are so many people, of course we can't make a move. Let's just take a nap here. When we wake up, there will definitely be no one here. We can make a move then. Yeah, silly. You're so smart. The 2 Minotaur demons shrunk their heads and fell asleep in the corner of the bushes. Today's new item, beggar's chicken. Apart from the enlarged menu at the entrance of the restaurant, there was also a small notice hanging on it. The news of Meg's duel with the Orc brothers at noon had spread like wildfire. The scrumptiousness of the beggar's chicken was even described as something that could only be found in the heavens. It whetted everyone's appetite. Beggar's chicken? What kind of chicken is that? A chicken that melts when it cries. Interesting. I want one. Crassus sat down and flipped through the menu for a while before nodding. His appetite was getting better and better after eating at Mammoth's. The meat that he had originally given up on had now become something that he often ordered. Originally, he was worried that he wouldn't be able to teach Amy for long. But now, he was confident that he could train Amy to become the strongest close combat magic caster on the Norland continent. Before that, he wouldn't die. I want one too, Julian said in a hoarse voice as he looked at Crassus. The beggar's chicken is super delicious, but it's a little too much. If the two of you can't finish it, your precious disciple can share some of the burden with you. Amy came forward and blinked her big eyes. She looked like a good disciple who was willing to share her master's burden. Sure. Then little Amy will help me eat half of it, Crassus said with a doting smile. Master Crassus, you're the best. Amy said happily. Another one for little Amy. Julian raised his finger coolly. Even ordering a beggar's chicken made him look like a grandmaster. Wow. Master Julian, I love you. Amy's eyes were already lit up with little stars. Give me 10 more for Amy's supper. Crassus looked at Julian and pursed his lips. 10. This is too blissful. Amy clasped her little hands together with a blissful face. This is a beggar's chicken that costs 1,500 copper coins each. Is money a joke? What do you know? These two are the legendary great magicians, the Lord of Ice and the Lord of Fire. What's the big deal about buying 10 roast chickens? Is it more important than little boss happiness? I'm so envious. I also want to have such a master. My master only knows how to snatch my drumsticks to eat. The customers looked at this scene with envy. At the same time, they were worried that the two magicians would fight and order all the beggar's chicken for the day. If that happened, they would have nothing to eat. But no one dared to say anything. They were legendary great magicians. Would anyone dare to snatch the roast chicken from them? Meg, who was in the kitchen, looked at this scene and walked out helplessly. He looked at Amy and said, Amy, you're full for tonight. You're not allowed to eat anymore. All right. Amy shrugged with slight disappointment. She looked at Crassus and Julian, shook her head, and said, Masters, please treat me next time. As night fell, the customers dispersed, and the lively Amy's also returned to its peaceful state. A gust of cold wind blew, and a torrent sneezed. He raised his head and looked around in confusion. His eyes widened, and he kicked another torrent's butt. Idiot! Get up quickly, it's time to act. Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 1043. When the two Taurens arrived in front of Amy's, it was already late at night and there were no pedestrians on the streets. They didn't know how long they had slept. Big idiot, the door is closed, how are we going to do it? Why don't we find a place to sleep and wait until the sun rises? Two Idiot rubbed his eyes and yawned. That's true. Big Idiot nodded, but quickly shook his head and said, No, the king said that he would only give us 3 days. We have already spent a day on the way here. If we don't kidnap him out of the city today, we won't be able to make it back in time. Then what do you think we should do? The door is already closed. Two Idiot said anxiously. We're not here to eat. Who cares if the door is closed or not, we can just kick it open. It's so late at night, it's easier to kidnap him. Big Idiot patted Two Idiot's head and laughed. That's true. Two Idiot nodded with a smile. He looked around and saw that there was no one around. He walked to the door and kicked it open. The door of the restaurant was just a wooden door. It didn't look very sturdy. He was a level 4 Tauren demon, so he could kick 10 of them away with one kick. Big Idiot watched from the side. The king sent the two of them to catch a human chef. It was a waste of talent. They couldn't even get a good night's sleep. When Two Idiot kicked the wooden door, it was as if he had kicked a piece of iron. The wooden door didn't budge, but his leg was a little numb from the impact. This wooden door is made of iron. Two Idiot was stunned and muttered. Two Idiot, did you not eat? You can't even kick open this broken door. Big Idiot looked at Two Idiot whose leg was still stuck to the door and laughed. He reached out to push Two Idiot away. Detected level 4 attack. Analysis: the intruder's strength is too low. Threat level is 0. There is no need to inform the host. Activating automatic defense system. Activating reflect, 10 times the damage. A line of small words flashed through Meg's mind. A green light flashed on the wooden door. Idiot, who was about to retract his right leg, felt a terrifying force coming from his leg. It was as if he had been kicked, and his body turned into a parabola and smashed into the grass 30 meters away. Ouch! Dumb screamed. Big Dumb blinked his eyes. He still hadn't recovered from what had just happened. Dumb kicked the door and sent himself flying. Hearing Dumb's scream, he quickly turned and ran towards Dumb. Dumb. Big Dumb dragged Dumb out of the bushes. Looking at his deformed right leg, he couldn't help but be shocked. Dumb, what are you doing? You son of a bitch, how did you end up like this? That door, it kicked me. Dumb covered her leg and said in pain. Let me take a look for you. Big Dumb squatted down, and after a while, he successfully broke Dumb's broken leg. This should be better, right? Big Fool stood up, wiped the sweat on his forehead, and looked at the pale-faced Fool. Yes, the pain is clearer now. Dumb nodded. That's good. Big Fool heaved a sigh of relief. He picked up a large rock from the side and angrily walked towards Amy's. Son of a bitch, how dare you hurt my brother? See if I don't smash your broken door. Clang. The rock hit the door, and made a dull thud. Then, that rock hit Big Dumb's head at an even faster speed, and brought him back to Dumb's side. Big Dumb, are you alright? Dumb asked Dumb in a panic while lying down. I'm alright. Is my head still on my neck that you touched? Dumb asked dizzily. Your head is still there. It's just that pair of horns. Dumb looked at the remaining half of Big Dumb's horn on his head, and gulped. Your horns are gone. What? My horns? Big Dumb's eyes widened as he saw the broken half of his horn beside him. His eyes rolled back, and he fainted immediately. Big Dumb. Big Dumb. Dumb crawled over and patted Big Dumb's face. He looked in the direction of the restaurant with a long face. This broken door has a spirit. I have to report this to the king. Roth Empire, in the royal palace. In a magnificent palace, the king of the Roth Empire sat on the throne. Below him stood the first prince, Sean, and the second prince, Josh. There were only 3 people in the entire palace. The 3 most honorable people of the Roth Empire, the current ruler, and the future ruler, were all standing here today. The king looked at the 2 of them, and calmly asked, in 2 months, the 8 major races will be negotiating a new peace agreement. How do you think the Roth Empire should negotiate? Sean glanced at Josh, and cupped his hands. I think that after 100 years of development, the Roth Empire's power has already far surpassed the other races, and is only weaker than the giant dragons. We should not continue to sign this peace agreement. Instead, we should take this opportunity to expand the Roth Empire's territory to the entire Norland continent. The king's expression did not change, but his grip on the 2 round beads tightened slightly. I don't agree with royal brother. Josh took a step forward and said to the king, Royal father, although the Roth Empire's national power has been strong all these years, and far surpasses the ordinary races, it's not fashionable to say that we have already dominated the Norland continent. Although the giant dragons are a pile of loose sand and are nothing to be afraid of, they will definitely not sit back and watch us dominate the Norland continent. Furthermore, in recent years, there have been many alliances between the various races. If the Roth Empire were to go to war with 2 races at the same time, it would be very difficult for us to win. I think it's too early to talk about unifying the Norland continent now. We should renew the peace talks this time, but we have to redraw the territories. Given the power of our Roth Empire, we should have more land. Those weaker races should give in if they don't want to go through another war among species. Subduing the enemy without fighting is the best outcome. Sean looked at Josh mockingly, and said, territory is not something that can be obtained just by talking about it. Even those goblins hiding underground will not give up their territory so easily. War is the only way to redraw the Norland continent's territory. The Roth Empire's iron hooves will trample all enemies. The number of wizards in the Magus Tower is increasing rapidly, and their power has also increased rapidly in the past few years. Give them some more time, and they will become the Empire's strongest combat power. Josh looked at Sean, and also argued back. All right. The king's low voice interrupted the two's argument. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly, and he revealed a smile. Both of you seem to have forgotten about someone. Sean's and Josh's expressions changed slightly. Obviously, they had not forgotten. Tomorrow, I will announce to the world that as long as he returns to the Roth Empire, he will become the commander of the military. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, the mobile version of this book, .com. Chapter 1044. Early in the morning, as soon as Meg opened his eyes, he saw Amy sitting at the head of the bed, looking at him worriedly. What's wrong, Amy? Why did you wake up so early today? Meg sat up and asked softly. Last night, I dreamed that the kindest and most loving person in the world fell. And then? So I wanted to ask you when I woke up. Does it hurt? Amy reached out her little hand and touched Meg's forehead, her little face full of worry. Meg felt his heart tremble. It was so early in the morning, why was the little girl so sweet? It was so sweet that it reached his heart. Father is fine. Although I fell, I jumped up before I hit the ground. You see, I'm fine everywhere. Meg smiled and raised his arm, full of happiness. Father is fine, that's great. Amy's face also showed a smile. Okay, then Father will get up and prepare something delicious for you. Meg patted the little girl's head, got out of bed, washed up, and went downstairs. Only then did he notice a video record in his mind. Meg opened the video record while drinking water. In the video, 2 Minotaur demons attacked the restaurant, but the restaurant's defense system bounced them back. Meg, who was drinking water, almost choked to death. 2 stupid thieves in the middle of the night. But system, your bouncing skill is quite interesting. Meg, who finally stopped coughing, praised the system in his mind. It was a pity that there was no internet in this world. Otherwise, this video would definitely go viral. Putting down the cup, Meg couldn't help but want to go out and see if the wooden door, which was kicked and thrown a stone yesterday, was broken. As soon as he opened the door, an envelope fell from the doorknob. This is. Meg picked up the envelope. On the grass-green envelope, there was a beautiful handwriting, to Mr. Meg. Who wrote this letter to me? I don't have any friends I need to send a letter to. Meg was a little puzzled. The handwriting looked like a woman's. This shouldn't be a love letter, right? Meg muttered as he prepared to open the envelope. Did someone write a love letter to Father? Amy, who had come downstairs at some point, came over and looked curiously at the envelope in Meg's hand. No, this is just an ordinary letter. Meg quickly shook his head. Although he was touched just now, it was undeniable that the little fellow still had the identity of a spy. Some words could not be passed to Irina's ears. Otherwise, it would be impossible to explain. It's okay, Father. I won't tell big sister Irina. Just read the letter to me. Amy shook Meg's arm and begged. Okay. I'll read it. Meg's heart softened at Amy's shaking. He opened the envelope and read, Mr. Meg, I love you. Mag only recited one sentence before he couldn't continue the rest of his sentence. This is really a fucking love letter. Shouldn't a professional love letter first express the pain of not being able to get what you want, then implicitly express your feelings of love, and finally end with the main topic? Who would go straight to the main topic at the beginning? This standard, only a primary school student could write something like this, right? Meg's soul of ridicule had already started to become restless. But speaking of love letters, he remembered his young self. He had secretly fallen in love with a little girl with a ponytail sitting in front of him. After enduring the pain of lovesickness for 3 days, he couldn't help but write a love letter. He still remembered the specific content. It was roughly like this: oh, my Juliet. All right, Meg did not want to recall too much. In short, he was indeed a little surprised by this straightforward opening. It's really a love letter. Who could have written it? Could it be that she wants to be my mother? Amy looked curiously at the envelope in Meg's hand. Many people had already surfaced in her mind. Sister Gina doesn't know how to write. Then Sister Mia, Sister Elizabeth, Sister Barbara, Sister Phyllis, Sister Gloria, Teacher Luna, Sister Hill, and Sister Shirley. They all seemed to be interested in Father. Then who wrote this love letter? Sister Irina has so many love rivals. What should I do? Amy mumbled softly with a troubled expression on her little face. Amy, actually, this might just be a prank. What era is it now? Who would write such an old-fashioned love letter? Ha ha ha. Meg laughed awkwardly but politely. Although he was also curious about who wrote it, he felt a chill run down his spine when he heard Amy's mumbling. If this were to reach Irina's ears, who knew how many washboards he would have to kneel and break before he could cover it up? It's all right, Father. I will definitely help you find the person who wrote this love letter, Amy consoled him with a smile. I'm even more afraid when you're like this. Meg thought to himself. As usual, Phyllis was the first to arrive at the restaurant. As soon as Phyllis entered, Amy went up to her and asked with a smile, Sister Bean Sprout, do you like Father? Ah! Phyllis was stunned for a moment. When she realized what Amy was asking, she blushed immediately. She glanced at Meg, who was standing at the side with a look of despair, and quickly looked away. She pinched the corner of her shirt and said shyly, Boss is a very good person. I think everyone will like him. That means you like my father too? Amy blinked and muttered softly, I treat you like an older sister, but you want to be my mother. I'm not. Phyllis's face was as red as an apple. She was so embarrassed that she wanted to find a hole to hide in. Then did you write a love letter to Father? Amy continued to ask. Love letter? Phyllis was stunned for a moment, but this time she shook her head decisively. No. All right, I believe you. Amy nodded, a little disappointed. Someone wrote a love letter to Mr. Meg. Who is trying to make a move on Mr. Meg? Phyllis entered the kitchen, feeling as if her heart was being hung up. Next to her were Mia, Elizabeth, and Barbara. Sister Mia, Sister Elizabeth, and Sister Barbara, do you like Father? Amy asked the three of them. Yes, I like Boss a lot. Mia nodded seriously. Elizabeth glanced at Meg. He's a good person. Barbara also glanced at Mag. She coughed softly, and said, I don't like men. Then did you write a love letter to him? Amy continued to ask. Chapter 10:45. The three of them looked at Meg in shock. Meg shrugged, indicating that he did not know what was going on. Then, the three of them looked at each other again with a hint of scrutiny in their eyes. They did not feel anything when they interacted with each other every day, but after thinking about it carefully, they realized that Meg was indeed a very good man. He looked mature, steady, and handsome, and was much gentler than those hotheads. He was also very kind and dared to take responsibility for his actions. Moreover, he had an adorable little daughter. If they married him, they would not even have to think about having children. What could be more perfect? Of course, most importantly, his superb culinary skills and the endless supply of delicious food in his hands. If they married him, there was probably nothing more blissful in this world, right? At this thought, even Elizabeth could not help but look at Meg a few more times. No, I have to be single if I want to become the chief of the Frost Dragon tribe. Otherwise, I'll waste a lot of my cultivation time by dating every day. Elizabeth shook her head slightly to calm herself down. Moreover, the dragon race has a lifespan of thousands of years. Humans can only live for 100 years at most. It's destined that it's impossible between us. If I can marry Boss, that'll be so blissful. Yarbemia's eyes lit up like little stars, but they quickly dimmed. But I don't know anything, I'm not good looking, and I'm an orphan. I definitely won't be good enough for Boss. That's really regrettable. Marry him? Barbara's eyes showed that she was thinking, but she quickly shook her head. No, he's just a commoner, and I'm the princess of the Moon Nation. Father will definitely not agree to this marriage. But why do I have an inexplicable feeling of regret? If Father tries the food he cooks, he might change his mind. No. Why am I thinking about this? I'm the princess of the Moon Nation, but the beef kebab is really delicious. If I go back to the Moon Nation, will I not be able to eat it anymore? Barbara was in a dilemma whether to agree or not. Maybe it's a prank. Meg hurriedly tried to smooth things over. Although he didn't know who wrote the love letter, it was too strange to take a love letter and ask them if they liked him. Good morning, Uncle Meg, Amy, and all my sisters. At this moment, Anna and Shirley pushed the door open and greeted everyone with a smile. Anna, what's this on your head? Mag asked curiously as he looked at the hat on Anna's head that had two antennas sticking out of it. Could it be that this little cutie was cosplaying as a Teletubby today? This is the bunny hat that Sister Shirley gave me, Anna said with a smile. She stretched out her hand and tapped her ear. The two cylinders shook, and two chicken heads popped out from the top, letting out a loud and clear cry. Wow, that's amazing. Amy's eyes widened as she clapped. Haha, it's a little cute for some reason. The girls also looked at Anna's hat in surprise. Shirley raised her chin slightly, and her expression was very indifferent. However, the slight curl of her lips revealed her smug mood. This is really the mudslide of a bunny hat. Meg opened his mouth and didn't know how to praise her for a moment. Amy quickly returned to the topic. She looked at the two of them and asked curiously, Sister Shirley, Sister Anna, do you like my father? Did you write him a love letter? Love letter? But I haven't grown up yet. Anna shook her head with a hint of regret in her voice. Shirley glanced at Meg, and the corners of her lips curled up slightly, revealing a strange smile. She shook her head and said, I don't like men, especially men with beards. As soon as she said that, the girls fell into deep thought and moved away from her. Shirley glanced at the girls and said lightly, I don't like women, either. Everyone looked at her. She didn't like men, nor did she like women. Then what did she like? Then, do you like transvestites? Amy asked curiously. How is that possible? Shirley almost choked to death. Looking at the innocent Amy, she felt like she was looking at Princess Irina back then. However, she couldn't get angry. She could only sigh and say helplessly, I only like myself. A beautiful person like me probably won't be able to like anyone else in this lifetime. TSK. Everyone rolled their eyes. They had seen narcissistic people before, but they had never seen someone narcissistic to this extent. From everyone's reaction, Meg had basically eliminated everyone's suspicions. Because if it was really done by one of the girls, there was no need to put the love letter on the door. They could have found an opportunity to stuff it into his pocket. Wouldn't that be more obvious and simple? In that case, the suspect was most likely outside the restaurant. Until now, Meg had already forgotten how many guests had confessed to him. There were more than 100 women alone, not including men, therefore, this clue was equivalent to invalid. Of course, Meg really wasn't too curious about who wrote the love letter to him. After all, the number of people who called him hubby back then could circle the earth a few times while holding hands. If he really wanted to find out, wouldn't he be exhausted to death? Moreover, if the girl who wrote the love letter wasn't pranking him, then as long as he waited, she would come out sooner or later. He was right here. Could it be that they could bypass him? Madam, you didn't sign your name on the love letter. Will he know it was written by you? If he doesn't know, wouldn't our efforts be in vain? In a shadow outside Amy's, the black cat servant looked at Camilla worriedly. A devilish smile appeared on Camilla's face. She licked her red lips and said, not letting him know is my goal. I want to use this love letter to mess up his heart and make him think that there's really someone around him who likes him. This stinky man will definitely not be able to resist the urge to verify who wrote the love letter to him. He might even do something even more impatient. As long as he shows his true face and lets Miss Gloria see it clearly, then everything will be resolved. Then you said before that you would personally. Wouldn't that be letting this stinky man off easy? It's not yet time for me to personally take action. I have plenty of ways to deal with stinky men like this. Camilla said rather confidently. Gloria, do you like my father? You know everything. I only secretly like him in my heart. Gloria's expression changed slightly and she even stuttered a little when she spoke. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 1046. There was an uproar at the entrance of the restaurant. Everyone looked at Gloria, who was frantically answering Amy's question, in shock. "No, Mr. Mac is mine." The women looked nervous, but when they saw Gloria's beautiful face and elegant temperament, they felt a little discouraged. They didn't know which family she came from, but whether it was in terms of appearance or temperament, she was indeed very compatible with Mr. Mac. Even their height made them look like a pair of jade people when they stood together. It was enviable. Mr. Mac is simply a goddess harvester. This is too much. Yeah, there are already so many beautiful women in the restaurant, but Mr. Mac doesn't even let the customers off. He's a beast. The men, on the other hand, were furious. "Do you like me?" Meg was also a little surprised. He looked at Gloria, who was blushing and looking down, not daring to look at him. He felt a little strange. Gloria was indeed a very beautiful woman. She was comparable to Irina. She had a quiet and obedient temperament. She didn't have a sharp edge, but people couldn't ignore her. She had a delicate heart and made people feel very comfortable when they were around her. If it was in his previous life, Meg would have put her at the top of his list of interested people. However, he was no longer the playboy from before. He had Amy and a wife, Irina. This was a very strange bond. He and Irina had only met a few times, but they had gone through life and death together. That woman who had a clear and strong personality and would show her gentle side to Amy had left an indelible mark in his heart. He didn't know if he had fallen in love with her. He also couldn't be sure that she would be the one for him in the future. However, before he brought her back from the wind forest and gave her true freedom, he probably wouldn't consider dating another woman. This would make him feel like a scumbag. Although he had never thought of himself as a good man, he really wanted to be a good father, a father that Amy would be proud of. "No. You can't do this. That's not how the script was written." Camilla's face turned pale as she clutched her chest in pain. This love letter seems to have given him an assist. The black cat servant gulped, also a little stunned. If he agrees, then the two of them will walk into the wedding hall hand in hand. "No. I can't let the plot continue like this." A black club appeared in Camilla's hand as she stared fiercely at Meg. "Madam, don't be rash. This is Chaos City, and if you kill him in front of Miss Gloria, she will hate you for the rest of her life." The black cat hurriedly pulled Camilla back. "Am I supposed to just watch the two of them be together?" Camilla stomped her feet in anger. Let's see. Good heavens. What did I say? I actually said that I like Mr. Meg." Gloria's heart was also in a complete mess. She had been thinking about something before she entered the room, and when Amy asked her that question, she accidentally blurted out what was on her mind. She could feel everyone's eyes on her, and she wanted nothing more than to dig a hole in the ground and hide in it. "Will Mr. Meg think that I'm a strange woman? He won't like me, right? Will we not be friends in the future?" She didn't dare to look up at Meg. Her heart was in a mess, and she was so anxious that she was about to cry. "It's all right, big sister Gloria. You're so pretty. Even if you want to be my mother, I won't find it hard to accept," Amy consoled. Wow. Even little boss approves. There was an uproar at the restaurant's entrance again. Of course, most of them were women's screams. Gloria's face became even redder, but a glimmer of hope and anticipation welled up in her heart. If Amy agreed, "Do you all like me?" Right at this moment, Meg took a step forward and looked at the customers at the entrance. "Mr. Mac, I love you. Mr. Mac, I want to give birth to your babies." The women screamed and professed their love in a frenzy. There were also some burly men, orcs, and demons among them. "Looks like everyone really likes my food. I like all of you too." Meg smiled. He then turned to Gloria and said, "Miss Gloria, do you still want to eat tofu pudding today? You always order a portion. It looks like you really do like it." Yeah. A hint of disappointment flashed through Gloria's eyes, but she hurriedly nodded. A smile reappeared on her face, and she nodded at Meg. "Yes, Mr. Meg's tofu pudding really is irresistible. Thank you for the compliment." Meg also nodded with a smile. "That's good enough. Why did they have to make it so awkward? Even if they couldn't date now, they could still continue to be friends. Is this fellow's brain damaged? Camilla, who was about to rush out with her club, suddenly stopped in her tracks and looked at Meg in shock. Yes, such a good opportunity was placed in front of him. As long as he agreed, everything would be logical. He actually rejected it. The black cat was also dumbfounded. It seems that I have overestimated him. With his intelligence, normal methods will not be effective. We must use some unconventional methods. Camilla put away the club in her hand. Unconventional methods? Yes. Camilla nodded, and then began to take things out. Ropes, whips, candles. The black cat counted all the things Camilla took out at the side. On this day, an announcement from the Roth Empire was spread across the Norland continent. The announcement was very short, but the information in the announcement caused a huge uproar. General Alex was promoted to the Grand Marshal of the Roth Empire's military. This announcement was sent to the upper echelons of all the races as quickly as possible. At the same time, it also became the headlines of all the magazines and newspapers. Bullshit. Alex was almost killed by them back then. Now that he's back, how could he still work for them? Andre, that old dog, is terrifyingly evil. The dwarf king slammed the letter in his hand onto the ground, and said angrily, Andre, that old dog, is indeed scheming. Although we don't know if Alex will agree, the way he did it before the negotiation made it impossible to ignore Alex's existence. The goblin high priest looked at the letter in his hand with worry in his eyes. That old man, he's dreaming. Meg pursed his lips as he looked at the newspaper headline in his hand, and threw the newspaper into the rubbish bin. Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1047. Upon seeing this news, Meg's first reaction was indeed a little shock. The Grand Marshal of the military was the head of the Roth Empire's military. A person who controlled the Empire's military was only second to the king in the Roth Empire. His real power and prestige far exceeded the two princes. It was precisely because of this that the position of the Roth Empire's Grand Marshal had been vacant for many years. The military was directly controlled by the king, who directly commanded the 8 marshals. But now, the king had given such a powerful position to Alex. His actions were extremely strange. However, Meg was not a newbie who had just arrived in this world, after all. He quickly guessed the Roth king's sinister intentions. Even if Andre gave the king to him and allowed him to return to Rodu, he wouldn't take a second look. Although it was basically confirmed that Josh had colluded with the demons, orcs, and elves in the Rainy Night assassination more than 3 years ago, that was Rodu, after all. So many 10th-tier powerhouses had been mobilized to cut off all contact with the military. Meg would be ashamed of his own intelligence if he said that Andre knew nothing about it. And the last time in Rodu, Sean had colluded with the demons to kill Irina. There was also the shadow of the royal palace behind it. Sean and Josh were fighting to the death in front of the stage, but what really caught Meg's attention was that king who didn't show his emotions on his face. This old man was very evil. As for why he suddenly announced that he would make him the Grand Marshal of the military at this juncture, it was not difficult to figure out the reason after thinking about it carefully. In order to save Irina previously, he had killed the ancestor of the Void, Benson, and announced his return in a high-profile manner. It could be said that he had become famous again. The title of the #1 knight of the Norland continent was not for nothing. It represented absolute power and absolute appeal in the military. And 2 months later, the Norland continent would be negotiating a peace agreement. If the negotiations could be carried out at the negotiating table, he would become an important bargaining chip for the Roth Empire. And once the negotiations broke down and the various races resumed war, his existence would also make the various races more wary. He didn't even have to do anything. It was enough to just hang his name there. With Sean's and Josh's hatred for him, they would definitely not make such a suggestion to the king. This gave Meg a deeper understanding of that old fox's cunning. Compared to his 2 impatient sons, Andre, who had been sitting quietly on the throne for decades, was more like a wolf that hid its fangs. That was a good plan. Given Alex's character, He would most likely agree to it because of his relationship with the Roth Empire. But he wasn't Alex. He was Meg. Whoever made him unhappy, he had to get back at them. Gina, Phyllis, Anna, I'm going out. Meg threw the newspaper into the trash can and said something to the kitchen before pushing his bicycle out. The lights were dim in a completely sealed meeting room within the City Lord mansion. 3 figures were seated in front of a round table. They were relatively far away and their expressions were somewhat grave. It seems like King Andre doesn't intend to maintain the original peace agreement. Even if he doesn't start a war, he will most likely request for the current territory to be reset, Michael said with a grave expression. It's not just Andre. The demons, orcs, forest trolls, elves, and all the other races that had improved greatly in the past 100 years want to reset the territory. The demons were the ones who made the most noise back then. However, after Benson and 6 10th-tier powerhouses were killed by Alex and Irina, they lost a lot of power, so they restrained themselves a lot. The Grey Temple's lord, Roland, who was wearing a grey robe, shook his head slightly, and spoke in a low voice. We had already expected this, but we didn't expect him to push Alex to the front. Initially, all the races were still guessing if Alex would return to the Roth Empire. After all, the royal family couldn't wash their hands clean of what happened back then, Novan said with a frown with a hint of worry. Michael also frowned. This will depend on Alex's attitude. Whether he will return to the Roth Empire or not. Once he returns, the cracks in the Roth Empire's military that were caused by his mysterious death back then will be wiped away. The Roth Empire's military will be completely united and have a terrifying cohesion. This is not a good thing for the other races. Given Alex's character, he most likely won't say anything about this. Once he agrees, all the other races will have to include him in the Roth Empire's camp. In this way, the Roth Empire's power will surpass all the other races except the giant dragons. The peace agreement in 2 months' time will be led by them. To us, the situation will become very disadvantageous, Roland said. Yes. Although Alex is just one person, he has become a person who can affect the balance of all the races in the current situation of the Norland continent. Novan's voice was filled with emotions. The goblins and dwarfs have already formed an underground alliance with us. The 2 of them are currently the 2 weakest races on the Norland continent. If the peace agreement doesn't go smoothly this time, the 2 races will be forced to hand over their territories, or even face the danger of being attacked. With the combined efforts of us and the 2 races, the steam locomotive tracks are being laid very quickly. However, we still don't know how many bargaining chips we can get in the negotiations, Michael said. Roland nodded and said in a low voice, Chaos City's position is to try our best to keep all parties on the negotiating table. Once the negotiations break down and we enter the stage of war, Chaos City will most likely become the first target. Novan smiled and said, then, what we have to wait for now is Alex's response. I hope he won't disappoint us this time. The response that the entire Norland continent was waiting for came much faster than anyone expected. Howl. A loud cry spread throughout the Dragon Islands, attracting the attention of all the giant dragons on the various Dragon Islands. Who is this familiar voice? It's Alex's mount. Alex has appeared. Very soon, the Dragon Islands were in an uproar. The entire Norland continent was waiting for Alex's response to the Roth Empire's king's command. In the end, he appeared on the Dragon Islands. The purple-striped griffin glided over the Dragon Islands arrogantly and finally landed on the glass Dragon Island in the center. Alex, who was sitting on the griffin's back, held his sword with one hand, and left 2 lines of words on the glass dragon pillar. I'm not going to be the Grand Marshal. I want this world to be peaceful. Alex. It wasn't until the purple figure disappeared into the horizon that the great elder of the glass dragon tribe ran out in exasperation. He pointed to the sky and cursed, Alex, you fucking carved words on our tribe's sacred object again. Don't run if you dare. Great elder, why didn't you stop him when he was still here? He's already far away now. Idiot, if he's not far away, do you dare to force him? I've always listened to my heart. Please remember the domain name of this book. .com Wonderful Bookhouse. Com. Chapter 1048. The Glass Dragon Tribe was the #1 dragon tribe on the Dragon Island. Back then, Alex came to the Dragon Island for the first time, and had a huge battle with the great elder of the Glass Dragon Tribe. After winning, he carved a line of words on the Glass Dragon pillar. Alex and Irina came here. After so many years, Alex came to Glass Dragon Island again, and carved words on the Glass Dragon pillar again. However, this time, it was not a visit, but a high-profile response to the Roth Empire's announcement that had just shaken the continent. Alex's response was simple and extremely arrogant. Soon, this response spread across the Norland continent at lightning speed, and caused a huge commotion. Ha ha ha, great. As expected of Alex. That old dog, Andre, must be looking terrible now. In the dwarf palace, the king of dwarfs looked at the news he just received, and laughed heartily. The 3 big shots of Chaos City gathered twice in a day. This is really unexpected and comforting news. It seems like we should contact Alex. After all, we have the same goal, Michael said with a smile. I chased this chap down 18 streets back then. Roland's lips curled up slightly with a smile. A year later, he chased you down 36 streets, Novan said with pursed lips. A wave of hearty laughter sounded in the meeting room. Norland Empire, Rodu, in a tavern. Have you heard? Lord Alex refuses to be the Empire's Grand Marshal, a fatty said softly. I was just about to tell you about this. I have a friend who works in the intelligence agency. The latest news we got is that Lord Alex came to Glass Dragon Island, and left 2 lines of words on the Glass Dragon pillar. Guess what those words are? A skinny middle-aged man said mysteriously. What words? The people in the tavern couldn't help but stop what they were doing and listen carefully. I'm not going to be the Grand Marshal. I want this world to be peaceful, that man said in a low voice. Gasps could be heard in the tavern. When they heard that Lord Alex had become the military's Grand Marshal this morning, almost the entire Roth Empire was excited. The god of war had returned to protect the Roth Empire again. How exciting was that? However, after only half a day, a piece of news spread back to Rodu, and it was like a resounding slap to everyone's face. The so-called promotion was just the king's wishful thinking. Alex personally responded and refused to be the Grand Marshal. Moreover, his words were extremely strong and did not give the king any face. Could it be that Master Alex is no longer protecting the Roth Empire? Someone sobbed softly with deep disappointment. Everyone present also couldn't hide their melancholy. Once upon a time, the invincible Alex was the pride of the Roth Empire. He was the reason why every human could walk with their heads held high in front of other species. But now, this confidence might no longer belong to them. Do you not want to live anymore? How dare you say such things here? The few newspapers in Rodu have all received a notice. They are not allowed to report a single word about this matter. Otherwise, they will all be arrested and beheaded. A middle-aged man in a long robe at the side chided softly. I'm being nosy. I was just saying. Don't take it seriously. I still have something to do at home. I'll take my leave first. The middle-aged man's expression changed drastically. He found an excuse and fled. Everyone else's expression changed when they heard that. They settled the bill and got up to leave, afraid of getting into trouble. Similar things were happening all over Rodu. Although not everyone knew the details, the news of Alex refusing to be the Grand Marshal still spread quickly throughout Rodu, and became a secret that everyone knew. In the palace's main hall, the 2 princes, 10-odd military officials, and the president of the Magus Tower, Richard, were all standing with grave expressions. The news that they received a few hours ago cast a shadow over everyone's faces. No one expected Alex to give such a strong and direct reply. Bastard. This Alex actually dares to be so arrogant and disregard royal father. He has made the Roth Empire the laughingstock of the entire continent. In the main hall, Sean couldn't hide his anger as he looked at the king, and said, Royal father, I think we should issue a kill order and kill Alex. Only then can we save the Empire's face. However, there was a hint of joy in his eyes. Royal father, I also agree with royal brother on this matter. If we don't punish Alex, The Roth Empire won't be able to raise its head in the meeting of the various races 2 months later, Josh also said with a grave expression. Many of the other military officials in the hall also spoke up to support the two princes. They wanted to make Alex pay the price to restore the Empire's prestige. The crowd was agitated. It was as if they would chop Alex's head back with their swords as long as the king gave the order. Your Highnesses, Lords, and General, what you said is not without reason. Alex's actions and words have disregarded His Majesty's orders and brought shame to the Roth Empire. He is indeed unforgivable. Right at this moment, an old official standing in the corner stepped out and asked everyone calmly, however, if His Majesty really gives the order to kill Alex, who here can kill him? Who has the confidence to kill him before the peace talks 2 months later? How many top-notch combat powers do the military and the Magus Tower have to sacrifice to kill him? I wonder if all of you have considered this before? Once the old official said that, everyone fell silent. Killing Alex was something that many people wanted to do. But in the past many years, other than the extremely calculated siege on the rainy night 3 years ago, no one had succeeded. The number of assassins and killers who had died in his hands was innumerable. However, even in that ambush 3 years ago, with the right time, place, and people, and with tens of 10th-tier powerhouses, Alex's daughter as a hostage, he still didn't die. In that case, now that they didn't even know what he looked like and where he was, it was almost impossible to kill him. Even if they sent out all the 10th-tier powerhouses from the military and the Magus Tower, as long as they couldn't form an ambush, the people who found him first would only be killed. Back then, Alex had dominated the continent, and everyone didn't have a strong concept of how powerful he was. But now, he was standing on the opposite side of the empire. His power was a headache for the entire empire. The hall was silent. Even Sean and Josh were silent. Who said I want to kill him? As long as he is still alive, the mark of the Roth Empire on him will never be erased. He is still the guardian of the Roth Empire. Can he really watch the Roth Empire perish? Andre, who had been silent all this while, said with a cold smile. However, there was a strong murderous intent in his smile. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 1049. At the periphery of the Wind Forest, the rebel elves' temporary base. An elf walked quickly into the largest tent, and looked at Irina, who was looking at the map, delightedly said, "Your Highness, the agreement with the goblins has been reached. We will be allowed to build a base in the underground caverns in an area of the Gedda mountain range." Very good. Irina turned around with the same smile on her face. She nodded, and said, "According to the original plan, let our people retreat into the underground caverns in batches, and set up a new line of defense according to the terrain of the underground caverns." All right. That elf nodded. He looked at Irina, and hesitantly said, "Your Highness, I heard a piece of news from the goblins just now. You might be interested in it." "What news?" Irina asked. "This morning, the King of the Roth Empire announced that Alex has been promoted to the position of Grand Marshal of the military." Heh. This must be fake news released by that old dog for the various races meeting in 2 months' time to increase his bargaining chip in the negotiation. Irina sneered, and regretfully said, "It's a pity that Alex is a fool. He definitely won't say anything about this. That old dog has already calculated this." "No, Lord Alex has responded." That elf shook his head. "Responded?" Irina raised her voice. No one in this world should know better than her what kind of person Alex was. How could he respond to something like this? "Don't tell me he agreed," Irina said with uncertainty. She wouldn't be too surprised if something like this happened to Alex. That elf shook his head with admiration, and said, "No, Lord Alex rode the purple-striped griffin to Glass Dragon Island, and then carved 2 lines on that glass dragon pillar. I'm not going to be the Grand Marshal. I want this world to be peaceful." Irina's mouth opened slightly. After the initial shock, she was even more surprised. She smiled, and said, "Has this fellow finally been enlightened?" A smile appeared on the elf's face at the sight of Irina's long-lost smile. Everyone on the Norland continent knew about the relationship between Irina and Master Alex. For the sake of the elven slaves living at the bottom of society, She initiated this rebellion. She gave up her noble identity and status as an elf, gave up the opportunity and freedom to be with Lord Alex forever, and was even willing to lead them into the dark catacombs. This kind of sacrifice was the reason why all the elves who risked their lives to leave the Wind Forest were willing to follow them to their deaths. Wait, there's something I need you to do. Irina stopped the elf who was about to sneak out. She quickly walked to the table, picked up a pen and paper, and wrote a letter. She folded it and sealed it before handing it to the elf. She smiled, and said, "Send this letter to the Lord of Chaos City's Grey Temple. It's time to announce something to the world." "Yes." The elf clenched the letter in his hand and turned to walk out the door. However, just as she reached the entrance of the tent, Irina suddenly called out to her. "Let me make a trip to Chaos City personally." The purple-striped griffin stopped at the top of the mountain. Meg patted Arzee's head and asked it to go back. Howl Tilda Arzee rubbed its head against Mag's hand. It was very reluctant to part with Mag, but it kept looking back as it went into the cave. This made Meg feel a little guilty. He shouted in the direction of the cave, "Arzee, I'll bring you delicious food next time." Howl Tilda Arzee stuck its head out immediately, and let out an excited cry at Meg. Meg went down the mountain with a smile. He then took out his bicycle and rode toward Chaos City. This trip to Dragon Island could be said to have given him an award-winning performance. He displayed the arrogance and aura of a 10th-tier powerhouse to the extreme. However, it was also because Alex's reputation was strong enough that he was able to put on a show. He was also very satisfied with the 2 sentences that he had been thinking about along the way. One was a slap in the face, while the other was a statement of his stand. That wanton exhilaration made him even more eager to recover his strength. Not long after he entered the city, Mag sensed an indistinct aura following him, and that made him nervous all of a sudden. "Is it a pervert who's coveting my beauty?" Meg frowned. He felt that things weren't as simple as they seemed. However, on second thought, such perverts would usually target crossdressers like Shirley. The moment he took off his pants, they would most likely get even more excited. "Could it be that I've been exposed?" Mag's expression became even more wary. Even though he had always been very careful and had never given himself away in front of any living beings, the timing of his departure from the city could very well be linked to what had happened to the dragon tribe. Even though it was unlikely that anyone would be able to make such a connection, he still considered the worst-case scenario out of caution. "This aura doesn't seem very strong, but it's very good at hiding. Seems like I have to find an alley to settle this." Meg glanced diagonally behind him without batting an eyelid. He changed his direction and rode toward an alley at the side. "Hey! Why isn't he going in the direction of the restaurant?" A black shadow appeared in the corner and quickly disappeared. Meg could feel that the aura behind him was still following him. The winding alley was getting narrower, and the courtyard walls were getting taller. A smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. This kind of place was most suitable for a sneak attack. He wanted to see who was tailing him. The bicycle passed through an alley and was about to turn. Suddenly, a huge black club smashed out of the alley. Meg, who was caught off guard, thought of countless tricks to avoid the club in that instant. However, before he could do anything, the club had already smashed into his face. "Heh, you've finally fallen into my hands." That was the only thing Mag heard before he fainted. There were also 2 long legs that were getting closer and closer, and read, "Madam, what should we do next? Should we just find a place to bury him?" The black cat servant appeared on the courtyard wall, and looked at Meg lying on the ground, and asked softly, "No, the motive is too obvious. It'll be easy to trace it back to us. Besides, if we kill him, I won't be able to eat delicious steak." Camilla shook her head, and looked at Meg lying on the ground. A wicked smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. "We just need to make him feel that he's a complete pervert, and make him feel ashamed, and feel that he's not worthy of the pure and elegant Miss Gloria. Then, what should we do? Drag him away, we'll find another place. It's not good to do this kind of thing outside." Camilla's smile became even more seductive, and she turned and left, swaying her sexy waist. Chapter 1050. Why isn't boss back yet? It's almost time to open for business. There are so many customers waiting in line. What should we do? Yarbemia stood at the entrance of the restaurant and looked out. Did father say where he went? Amy stood at the entrance with Ugly Duckling in her arms. She looked a little worried. Boss only said that he was going out for a while this morning. He went out with his bicycle, but he didn't say where he was going. Phyllis shook her head. They didn't know where boss went, either. Father, does he not want me anymore? Amy pouted. She felt a little wronged. Father had never left without telling her before. Yarbemia stroked Amy's head with a smile, and said, how could that be? Boss dotes on little Amy. How could he not want you? He must have been delayed by something, and couldn't make it back in time. We're going to open for business in 5 minutes. We still haven't prepared a third of the ingredients, and the food that needs to be prepared in advance hasn't been prepared. Even if boss comes back now, it'll be too late, Shirley said. Then what should we do? There are so many customers waiting in line. If we tell them that boss isn't around and ask them to come back next time, I'm afraid they'll smash the restaurant. MIA was a little worried. Elizabeth swept her gaze across the line, and calmly said, we don't have to worry about smashing the restaurant. As long as the 2 great magic casters don't do anything, the rest of them won't be able to beat us. This should be very interesting. Barbara rubbed her hands together as she looked at the customers in the line. Shirley looked at the long line, and shook her head slightly. If we don't inform them in advance and stop business for no reason, the restaurant's reputation will be greatly affected. We have to think of a way. Hearing this, everyone frowned and began to think carefully. Killing all the customers, giving each of them a copper coin, and hypnotizing them into thinking that they were full. After a series of strange thoughts, Phyllis said carefully, maybe. I can make the kebabs. Everyone looked at Phyllis, and their eyes lit up. Yeah, Phyllis's beef kebabs are already as good as Boss's. Why don't we change the theme to beef kebabs for lunch? That way, the customers in the line will at least have something to eat, Yarbemia said with surprise. Yarbemia's suggestion was unanimously approved by everyone. Soon, a new notice appeared at the entrance of the restaurant, the boss is out and hasn't returned yet. Today, there will be a special roast beef kebab session. All customers are limited to 2 kebabs per person. As soon as the announcement came out, the customers in the queue immediately went into an uproar. What's going on? Isn't it a little too much to have a beef kebab special? Although the beef kebabs are delicious, isn't it too much that each person can only eat 2? How can 2 skewers be enough to fill my stomach? But if Mr. Mac isn't here, then who made the kebabs? Mag woke up to a rustling sound. He opened his eyes in a daze, and his eyes met with a pair of white and tender breasts. They were swaying up and down in front of his eyes, and the waves were raging. The headlights of this car are so dazzling. Meg blinked and saw more clearly. Between the white and tender skin, there was a small mole, which added a bit of sexiness. Looking at the shaking of the headlights, it should be the E-car. It was definitely natural, otherwise, it wouldn't be swaying so naturally. Then, the memories before he fainted flooded Meg's mind. The narrow alley, the sudden appearance of a big club, everything ended there. Fuck. Have I been kidnapped? Mag raised an eyebrow. His gaze landed on the stage, and it landed on that seductive and familiar face that was almost touching his face. Countess Bartoli. Meg's expression was surprised but also somewhat expected. Since he came to this world, there were only a few women that had such a big heart, and this vampire countess was one of them. Meg knew her motive. It was most likely related to Gloria's unexpected confession to him this morning. From a long time ago, he knew that the countess was most likely a lesbian. After all, he had been warned twice by her using his real name. But he didn't expect that he would be knocked out and dragged away by her. If others knew that Alex, who had just been in the limelight on Dragon Island and rejected the position of the Roth Empire's marshal, was knocked out and then dragged into a small dark room, Meg shifted his gaze away from the swaying breasts in front of him and noticed that he was lying on a bench with his hands above his head. The sexy and charming countess spread her legs on top of him. Her tight black dress made her perky buttocks burst out in a beautiful arc. Her white and tender long legs stretched all the way to the slit of her dress. A touch of red was faintly discernible. Her face was flushed, and her forehead was covered in sweat. Her misty and seductive eyes were even more alluring. But what was she doing? Giving him benefits? Or was she planning to use him to correct her sexual orientation? Meg was a little confused. Although he rejected it in his heart, his body lay flat and even closed his eyes. However, at this moment, Mag also felt a smooth rope sliding around his hand. "Are you trying to tie me up? You have many tricks up your sleeve." Meg raised his eyebrows. However, the rope slid around his hand a few times, but it fell down very quickly. It just didn't manage to tie him up successfully. Its movements were so clumsy that even Meg had the urge to help. Fuck. Why is this high-grade spirit-locking rope so difficult to tie up? I've been tying it up for half an hour and still can't tie it up. I'm so angry. Camilla's angry voice sounded from the side. She didn't notice that Meg had opened his eyes. The small dark room maintained an awkward scene. Meg lay quietly on the wooden bench with his eyes closed. Camilla lay on top of him and kept trying to tie the rope around his hand. Half an hour passed. Meg couldn't help but open his eyes. He looked at Camilla and said, "Do you need my help?" "Okay." "Ah." Camilla looked down at Meg, who had woken up and was stunned. After a while, she said, "When did you wake up?" "I've been awake for a while," Meg said honestly. He glanced sideways and noticed the whip and candle on the chair at the side. This familiar configuration. "Mitch, how dare you pretend to be dead in front of me? Looks like I have to knock you out again." A black club appeared in Camilla's hand again. She muttered to herself, "No, I have to make him realize that he's a masochist." Meg did a quick calculation in his mind. Camilla's strength was level 9, and he was now at the peak of level 7. He definitely couldn't beat her. However, falling into an endless cycle of being knocked out was also not a solution. He didn't even know what time it was now. Therefore, he raised his hand and pointed at the thick red rope that was loosely tied around his hand. He smiled and said, "Countess, do you want to tie a rope? I'm very good at this. I can teach you." "You really know how to?" Camilla was a little doubtful. However, she was already on the verge of collapse after failing to tie the rope for so long. "Yes, it's actually very simple. I can demonstrate it to you." Meg's lips curled up slightly. He stood up from the wooden bed and the spirit-locking rope in his hand danced on Camilla's body. 5 minutes later, Meg looked at Camilla, who was tied up by the red rope, and nodded with satisfaction. "Look, this is a perfect tortoise shell." Chapter 1051. I haven't been here for 3 years, and there's still no change. How disappointing. On the streets of Chaos City, Irina, who was wearing a white veil hat, was looking around with a smile on her face. "His restaurant seems to be called Immerse, right? I have to ask someone for directions," Irina mumbled softly as she turned and walked into an alley. 5 minutes later, Irina was holding a chair in the corner of the alley. She looked at the weak and helpless forest troll curled up in the corner, and calmly asked, "Tell me, what do you know?" "Immerse is in Aiden Square. If you go now, you won't be able to make it in time for dinner." "That's all I know." That forest troll wanted to cry, but no tears came out. He looked at the maiden in the white veil hat, and didn't dare to move. He was walking on the street, but was knocked down by a stool for no reason, and then dragged into this alley to ask for directions. Who did he offend? Although he couldn't see this maiden's face, she looked thin and weak. However, that stool just now showed him the true meaning of life. Did he dare to move? He really didn't dare to move. "All right, you can faint now." Irina stared into that troll's eyes for a while. After making sure that he wasn't lying, she raised the stool in her hand. "You're embarrassing your mother. This place? It's quite nice, but why isn't there anyone here?" Irina stood in front of Immerse and looked at the closed restaurant with a frown. There wasn't a single person in the restaurant, not to mention Meg and Amy. "There's no need to wait, miss. I don't know where Boss Mag went to fool around today, but he disappeared without even applying for leave. If you want to eat, then come and line up earlier tonight." The opening hours have already passed. It's already closed. An old man sitting on a bench and basking in the sun reminded kindly as he looked at Irina's back. There was even a hint of resentment in his voice. She queued for more than half an hour this afternoon, and only managed to eat 2 kebabs. Although they were delicious, she still felt a little resentful that she couldn't fill her stomach with delicious food. Fooling around? Irina's gaze turned frosty all of a sudden, and even the surrounding temperature dropped significantly. She turned around slowly, looked at the old man, and asked coldly, "Where is he?" The old man's expression immediately changed. He could already feel the sudden drop in temperature, as well as the terrifying aura emanating from the young woman's body. He said in a trembling voice, I saw Boss Mag enter that alley in the morning. That's not the way back to the restaurant. Why are you so skilled?" In the small dark room, Camilla looked at the red rope that was tied up in a strange and ostentatious way. She couldn't help but blink. She had spent so much effort and still couldn't tie up Meg's hands, but he had completely tied her up in the blink of an eye. Meg suddenly thought of something, and a chill swept over him from behind. When he turned around, his eyes widened. At the door, a woman in a long white dress and a white veil had slowly retracted her leg. It seemed that the thick door had been kicked into pieces by her. Of course, this was not the main point. More importantly, Meg had already recognized who the person was. Even though she was wearing a white veil hat, the long white dress with golden embroidery, and the slender and sexy figure all revealed the person's identity. A woman who shouldn't have appeared here. The #1 strong woman on the Norland continent, the former princess of the elves, and also his wife in name, Amy's mother, Irina. In the dim room, there was a woman tied up with a thick red rope in a shameful way, a man in disheveled clothes, a whip carelessly thrown on the ground, and a lit candle in Meg's hand. Irina's face was as cold as ice, and frost started to spread from the door into the small black room with a deep chill. Irina glanced at Camilla, and her eyes narrowed slightly. She had ridden this bat with big boobs before. She didn't expect that she would dare to steal her man now. Meg's lips moved, and he forced a smile. "You might not believe it, but we are just rehearsing the script." Men. Irina glanced at him, and the candlelight became brighter instantly. A drop of red candle liquid flowed down the red candle and landed on his hand. He let out a cry of surprise, and his hand trembled as he threw the red candle away. Even through the veil, Meg could feel Irina's cold face. But this reason, even he didn't dare to believe it. Someone suddenly barged in, and this gave Camilla a shock. She actually let someone see her in this state. If word got out, her reputation would be ruined. If Miss Gloria finds out. Camilla didn't dare to think about it. It was already embarrassing enough to know that she was a masochist. If Gloria found out too, she wouldn't be able to raise her head in front of her. "Hey, woman, let me tell you, I am just showing him how to do it. He is my plaything. Don't misunderstand," Camilla said proudly with her chin raised. The spirit-binding rope restrained all her magic, and at the same time, made her unable to detect who the person was. She only vaguely felt a sense of familiarity. "Shut up, stupid bat." Irina took out a foldable wooden chair, and with a bang, the chair sent Camilla flying with her mouth wide open. She was embedded into the wall, and just like that, her eyes rolled back and she fainted. "Are you worthy of playing with my man?" Irina said coldly. Meg looked at the remaining leg of the chair in Irina's hand, and Camilla who was embedded into the wall, and his throat moved. A woman who flipped out was so scary. But, is this a crime scene? Meg was a little flustered, and he felt an inexplicable sense of shame as if he was caught red-handed. Wait, am I not the victim who was knocked unconscious and dragged here? Meg suddenly felt that something wasn't right. Crime scene, but, at the beginning, he was really just a weak and innocent victim. Why are you here? Meg tried his best to naturally shake off the wood shavings in his hair and asked Irina. "Alex, you have changed." Irina took off her veil and looked into Meg's eyes. She didn't tear his heart out, but her disappointed gaze made Meg feel even more ashamed. "It's not what you think." Meg wanted to explain. "You are so slutty." Irina frowned slightly. With a hook of her finger, the black whip on the ground fell into her hand. Meg wanted to run, but when he thought of the difference in strength between him and Irina, he couldn't move his feet at all. The main reason he didn't kneel on the spot was because his legs were frozen. Pa! The sound of the whip landing on the body echoed clearly in the small dark room. Book Guesthouse reading website. Chapter 1053. Pa, pa, pa. The sound echoed in the small dark room, accompanied by shouts that would make one's face turn red. Heh, you have indeed changed. Irina threw the whip in her hand to the ground. Looking at Meg, who was covered in whip marks, she let out a sigh of relief, and her tone became a little gentler. Meg, whose face was slightly red, stood up straight. She put down the whip. He was still an unyielding man, and said calmly, "What you see with your eyes is not necessarily the truth. Things are not like what you think. After so many years, don't you know what kind of person I am?" Irina looked at Camilla, who was embedded in the wall, and shook her head. "Back then, you could only accept things passively. But now, you've picked up a whip and a candle, and even learned such a complicated binding technique. Whose clothes are you wearing?" Meg wanted to cry, but no tears came out. He was obviously also a victim, okay. But I am really innocent. This morning, I went to Dragon Island. When I came back, I felt that someone was following me. I wanted to lure her out, so I turned into an alley. Then, I was knocked out and dragged here. If that is the case, you are still a passive masochist. If you must put it this way, probably. Irina stared at Meg's eyes for a while. Although there was a little helplessness in his eyes, he did not avoid her gaze. It was still as pure as before. "Okay, I will give you a chance to prove yourself." Irina pointed at Camilla, who was embedded in the wall. "Kill this fucking bat." This is not very good, right? Meg looked at Camilla, who was embedded in the wall in a strange position. Although this countess's brain circuit was a little weird, her actions so far were not enough to be beaten to death. Meg coughed lightly, and said with a wise face, "She is Countess Bartoli. Her position in the vampire tribe is not low. Killing her will definitely cause a lot of trouble. Moreover, she has a black cat servant. Most likely, she knows about this matter, but she is nowhere to be seen now. If this matter is spread out..." "You mean this ugly thing?" Irina went out and threw an unconscious black cat at Meg's feet. "Meg," the awkward silence lasted for a while. "Have you eaten yet? Why don't I go back and cook for you?" Meg looked at Irina and said softly, "I don't want noodles. I want steak." Irina's eyes lit up. "Okay, I'll make it for you." Meg nodded, stepped over the black cat, and walked out of the door. Irina glanced at Camilla, who was on the wall, and an ice blade appeared in her hand. However, the ice blade quickly shattered into ice shards on the ground. She put on her veil and turned to walk out of the door. Hair, a few 100-years-old virgin. Meg, who was standing at the door, happened to hear Irina's murmur. The corners of his mouth twitched. She was really an old virgin. However, he was relieved that she didn't kill anyone. After all, Camilla was one of the restaurant's regular customers. If she was killed because of a misunderstanding, it was inevitable that he would feel uneasy. The two of them walked in the direction of Amy's. Irina followed behind Meg about 10 meters, neither fast nor slow. Meg found a corner and put on some clothes. The clothes on his body were torn by Irina's whip, so it was easy to think of some strange things. When they reached the magic potion shop, Irina stopped and a trace of surprise flashed through her eyes. Meg, who had just walked to the door of the restaurant, quickly made a shushing gesture to Irina. He knew that Irina and Julian were old acquaintances, but he didn't want a third person to know about his relationship with Irina. Irina thought for a while and walked towards the restaurant. Meg breathed a sigh of relief and took out the key to open the restaurant door. It was already 2 o'clock in the afternoon, so there shouldn't be anyone in the restaurant. Ding-ling with a soft sound, Meg opened the door. "Mr. Meg," a surprised voice sounded. Before Meg could react, a figure with long golden red hair had already pounced on him. She jumped into his arms and wrapped her long, sexy legs around his waist. "Chirp, chirp, 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 chirp. Gina was babbling in the fish language. Although Mag couldn't understand her, he could sense her worry from her expression and tone. If it were any other time, Meg would definitely resist for 2 seconds and then accept the concern from his own employee. But now, he could already feel the chill coming from behind him. What day is it today? Why are there so many Shuras appearing one after another? Meg wailed in his heart. Ah, waitress Gina, I'm fine. I didn't get killed. Don't worry about me. Before Irina took out the small chair, Meg removed the bindings on Gina's legs and put some distance between them. The chair that Irina had just taken out was put back by her. His scrutinizing gaze paused on her chest for a while before he narrowed his eyes. It was actually a little bigger than hers. His gaze moved downwards. Because her clothes were short, her flat, snow-white stomach was exposed. There was even a white pearl embedded in her belly button. It was quite alluring. Further down, under the short skirt, were her long, straight legs that were covered in black stockings. Just a waitress? Irina didn't believe him. Come in first. Meg entered quickly. Of course, it was better to settle family matters at home. Who is she? Only then did Gina notice Irina behind Meg. A hint of doubt appeared in her eyes, but she still gave her an innocent smile. She held the door open so that Irina could enter. Who is she? Why is she in the restaurant? Irina was also sizing up Gina. She didn't understand a single word that she said just now. It wasn't the common language of the continent, nor did it sound like the language of other species. Gina is a mermaid. She was sent to the restaurant by the teleportation portal. Because she can't leave the sea, Amy temporarily took her in as a waitress in the restaurant. She custom-made a big fish tank for her and is responsible for comforting the customers' children. Meg quickly introduced as soon as they entered. Because of the language barrier, she likes to use body language to express herself. That hug just now is a body language that she often uses to express her welcome and concern. Hello, I'm Gina. Gina smiled and extended her hand to Irina. She greeted her in the common language of the continent with perfect articulation. Madam, can you not slap my face like that? Meg's expression froze instantly. Hello. Irina glanced at Meg and smiled coldly. She also extended her hand to gently shake Gina's hand. She. Meg felt his throat dry up. He didn't know how to explain at that moment. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com. Wonderful Bookhouse. .com. Chapter 1054. Gina, you go up and rest first. Meg gestured to Gina. It was better not to drag innocent people into this. He didn't know what would happen now. All right. Gina nodded obediently. Then, she waved at Irina, who was wearing a veil, and smilingly said, goodbye. It's good that Mr. Meg is fine. If something had happened to him, then Lantiste would be hopeless. But who is this woman wearing a veil? She's so mysterious. Could she be Amy's mother? Gina was filled with curiosity as she turned and went upstairs. She's really a mermaid. She almost died of thirst when she first teleported over, Meg said with a smile, pretending to be relaxed. A mermaid who can spread her legs. Irina sneered. Meg suddenly felt a little guilty, and carefully said, she evolved. After eating the beggar's chicken that I made, she learned to breathe on land. She can also maintain her human form for a longer period of time. Where's Amy? Irina didn't answer Meg's question, and asked instead. Her expression became much gentler at the mention of Amy. Amy went to school at Chaos School. She's learning magic from Magic Master Crassus. Meg quickly replied. His heart tightened. He didn't know what the little fellow had written down in her little notebook. If Irina knew about it, it wouldn't be as simple as kneeling on the washboard today. Irina nodded slightly. She already knew that Amy was learning magic from Crassus. She asked, what about Phyllis? Where did you settle her down? Phyllis is a service staff member in the restaurant. She's in charge of handling the ingredients and learning how to cook from me. She also takes care of Amy occasionally. You've already told her your identity. If you keep her by your side, won't it be easy for others to discover your identity? She doesn't know who I am. Furthermore, her identity has already been cleared. No one should suspect me. Meg shook his head. He was rather confident about this. He looked at Irina and said, however, has the elven issue been settled? Why are you here? Irina sat down on a chair and calmly said, I have started a revolution in the elven race. All the elves who betrayed the Wind Forest and joined us will become night elves. They will work hard to overthrow the rule of the Wind Forest, abolish the family system, and build a new elven paradise. Overthrow the rule of the Wind Forest. Meg was shocked when he heard Irina's casual words. Irina said it lightly, but the difficulty and danger involved made one's scalp go numb just thinking about it. It was often difficult to succeed in challenging a deeply rooted system without drastic social change as a foundation. I'm hungry. Irina raised her head and looked at Meg, pouting slightly. He didn't complain, nor did he ask too many questions. Meg felt his heart soften when he saw this woman who always maintained the posture of a powerhouse in front of others acting like a spoiled little girl in front of him. I'll go make black pepper steak for you. Take a look at the menu and see if there's anything else you want to eat. I'll make it for you. Meg turned and walked into the kitchen. Oh. Irina responded and flipped through the menu. Meg poured a glass of water and looked at Irina, who had just closed the menu. What else do you want to eat? Irina took the glass of water and took a sip. She smiled and said, only children make choices. I want everything. Everything? Meg raised his eyebrows and looked at Irina, who couldn't hide the tiredness in her eyes. He nodded and said, okay, I'll make everything for you. Okay. Irina nodded. She put down the glass of water and looked around. She looked in the direction of the stairs and said, you and Xiao Mai live upstairs? Yes. Meg nodded. After thinking carefully, he shouldn't have any strange things to pack. He said, if you want to know where Xiao Mai lives, you can go upstairs and take a look. I quite like this place. From today onwards, I'm the lady boss. Of course, I want to see where I'm going to live. Irina stood up and walked up the stairs. Lady boss, huh? It seems like I'm lacking one. Meg's mouth revealed a trace of a smile and turned to walk into the kitchen. There was only one customer this afternoon, but it was also the most important one. Irina followed the stairs to the second floor. The floor was paved with soft wooden flooring. The door of the room at the top of the stairs was open. There were all kinds of strange things inside. However, from the size, they should be Xiao Mai's toys. They almost occupied the entire room. There was even a swing by the window. He prepared quite a lot of toys for Meg. Irina nodded slightly. She was quite satisfied with this father of hers. As they walked further in, the sound of water ripples could be heard from a room with a half-closed door at the side. Irina looked in through the crack of the door. Her eyes revealed a trace of surprise. In the room, there was a huge crystal fish tank. In the fish tank, Gina's slender legs had turned into a rainbow-colored fishtail. She was blowing bubbles with her eyes closed. On the ground at the side, there was a small mountain of some kind of golden eggshell. Is it really a mermaid? However, why have I never heard of the mermaid race? Is it a type of demon? Irina thought doubtfully in her heart. She couldn't find any information about mermaids in her memory. However, this proved that Meg wasn't lying. There isn't even a hole. Irina turned around and walked to the next room with a relaxed expression. She pushed open the door. It was a very big room. There were 2 pairs of slippers at the door, one big and one small. One was a big bear head, and the other was a small bear head. There was a big bed in the middle of the room. The soft silk quilt made people feel warm. There was a small bed beside the big bed. There was a cute little bear pattern on the sheets. It looked like Amy's bed. Irina pushed open the wardrobe door. It was filled with all kinds of little skirts and clothes. There were only 3 sets of chef's clothes and 2 sets of black men's clothes in the corner of the wardrobe. That's more like it. Irina closed the wardrobe door and finally smiled. She opened her arms and lay back. Her whole body sank into the soft big bed. It's so comfortable tilde. The warm silk quilt exuded a pleasant fragrance. Her tense nerves and tired body were perfectly relaxed at this moment. A black pepper steak was quickly prepared. Meg waited downstairs for a while. Seeing that Irina didn't come down after a long time, he was worried that he might have left something behind. He carefully went upstairs to call her to eat. After pushing open the door, Meg saw Irina sleeping peacefully on the bed. Looks like you've been really tired recently. Meg walked over softly. He leaned over and lifted a corner of the quilt to cover her. At this moment, Irina suddenly opened her eyes. She raised her hand, grabbed his collar, and pulled it down. Chapter 10:55. Meg, who was caught off guard, only felt his collar tighten as he was pulled down. That smooth and exquisite face was getting closer and closer. He could clearly see the corners of her lips curling up slightly. Her cherry red lips were full and moist. Her eyelashes were trembling slightly. There was no sun, moon, or stars in her azure blue eyes, only him. At this moment, he felt his heart tremble slightly. Just like that, he allowed himself to fall down and press his lips against hers. Her soft red lips were warm and moist, just like a piece of strawberry-flavored jelly. He couldn't help but want to stick out his tongue and lick it gently. Irina closed her eyes immediately. Her long eyelashes were trembling slightly, and 2 patches of red rose on her cheeks. The hot breath hit her in the face. That warm and hot lips pressed tightly against her. Even her breathing seemed to be taken away in an instant. Her mind was a little muddled. Her body and lips became a little stiff. She didn't know what to do next. Soon, she felt a soft tongue gently glide across her lips. It was like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water. A strange numbness instantly spread and scratched her heart like a kitten's claws. Then, when she wasn't paying attention, it slipped into her mouth and unscrupulously seized the breath that belonged to her. This moment of throbbing made everything around them quiet down. Only her uncontrollable moan could be heard. In the battle of tongues, one side was unstoppable, and the other side was utterly defeated. Sucking, lingering, everything was wonderful beyond words. Her slender arms wrapped around his waist tightly. Their bodies were so close together that they could feel each other's heartbeats. After what seemed like a century, Meg slowly opened his eyes. His hands were on the bed. He looked at Irina, whose face was red and whose chest was rising and falling slightly. Her eyes were tightly shut, and her eyelashes were trembling slightly. She was playful and cute. His gaze couldn't help but become gentle. At this moment, he wanted to protect her forever. The throbbing of love was probably like this. The feeling of suffocation gradually dissipated. Irina slowly opened her eyes and met a pair of gentle eyes. She could hear the sound of her heart beating rapidly. After that passionate kiss, she realized that she could still feel her heart beating. Irina's voice had a trace of shyness. She wanted to break the charming silence. An untimely stomach growl finished the rest of her words for her. Are you going to eat the steak, or are you going to eat me? Meg's lips curled up with a hint of teasing. You're so coquettish. Irina reached out and pushed him. Me. Come on, let's consider it my loss if you shout once. Mag opened his arms fearlessly. Shameless. Irina snorted in her heart. The door was still open, and there was a bubbling mermaid next door. She still wanted to save face. She nimbly jumped to the ground and turned to walk out of the door. She pretended to be relaxed and said, I'll let you off this time. I'm hungry. I want to eat something delicious. Meg also got up from the bed and followed Irina with a smile on his face. Okay, I'll cook for you. Because of the short entanglement, the black pepper steak was a little cold, so Meg made another serving for Irina. He used a knife to cut open the steaming steak. The red meat juice and red wine flowed out. She put it into her mouth with a fork. After biting into the tender beef, the wonderful taste melted in her mouth. It's so delicious. Irina's eyes narrowed slightly. Her face was slightly red from the alcohol, but her face was full of happiness. Meg also had a smile on his face as he looked at Irina, who was enjoying the steak. At the same time, He calculated the cooking order of each dish in his mind. Tofu pudding, roast beef kebab, Peking duck. The tofu pudding had to be prepared in advance. If he started cooking now, he could serve it as a dessert when she was almost full. This roast beef kebab is so delicious. Give me 5 more of each flavor. The Peking duck is also delicious. Pack one for me to take away later. Oh, this rugiamo is so delicious. One dish after another was brought out by Meg. Irina's praise and cries of surprise reverberated throughout the dining room. Even Meg couldn't help but marvel at her appetite. A black pepper steak, 30 roast beef kebab, an entire Peking duck, 2 rugiamos, a spicy grilled fish. This was only the beginning. Phew. I think I'm a little full. Irina put down the drumstick in her hand and heaved a sigh of relief. A satisfied smile appeared on her face. Ever since Phyllis left, she hadn't eaten any cooked food, especially when she was fighting against the aura of death with the Tree of Life. She had relied solely on the Tree of Life to provide her with life energy. The current situation of the night elves wasn't optimistic. Just the lack of food was enough to give them a headache. Furthermore, fruits were the most scarce in the forest, and many elves didn't have enough to eat. As the leader, she naturally gave all the food to her clansmen, and had been drinking only due to allay her hunger for many days. Today, she had tasted the most delicious food in the world, and she had eaten until she was full. This feeling was simply too blissful. A warm and comfortable room, endless delicious food, and... Irina looked at Meg's side profile and those sexy lips in the kitchen, and a faint blush appeared on her face as she thought back to that kiss. And I can be with little Amy. This is a place that I don't want to leave. Lastly, there's a bowl of tofu pudding. Sweet or savory? Which one do you want? Meg said with a smile as he brought out 2 bowls of tofu pudding, and gently placed them in front of Irina. The fragrance of the tofu pudding wafted over. It was fresh and pleasant, and it relieved the greasy feeling from eating an entire beggar's chicken. Irina looked at the 2 bowls of tofu pudding. The one on the left was drizzled with golden red syrup, and looked sweet and alluring. The one on the right was drizzled with orange-red sauce, and there were pickles and green onions in the middle. Although I want to eat both, I can only eat one now, so I'll choose the sweet one. Irina moved the sweet tofu pudding in front of her, and used a spoon to dig into the tofu pudding that was covered by the golden red syrup. The cut was as white as jade, and it was quickly covered by the sticky syrup. The tofu pudding wrapped in the crystal clear syrup swayed slightly in the spoon, and it looked as exquisite as a piece of art. It's so beautiful. I didn't expect you to be able to make such beautiful food. No wonder no one doubted you, Irina said with a smile, and then put the tofu pudding into her mouth. The sweet and tender tofu pudding almost melted in her mouth. The syrup wrapped around it was so rich, and the sweetness blended perfectly with the tofu pudding. She couldn't help but close her eyes. After swallowing a mouthful of tofu pudding, she didn't feel the slightest bit of sweetness. There was a faint remnant of the tofu pudding in her mouth, and it was sweet but not greasy. She opened her eyes and stared at the small bowl in front of her. She couldn't help but spoon another spoonful into her mouth. The feeling of bliss was constantly pushed to the peak by spoonful after spoonful of deliciousness. Chapter 1056. Irina put down her spoon, and looked at Meg with a serious expression as she said, "When the war is over, I'll come back to be the owner of the restaurant. I feel like it's much more fun to be able to eat all kinds of delicious food every day than to travel the continent. Alright, I'll come and pick you up when the time comes." Meg nodded with a smile before pushing the savory tofu pudding forward as he said, "Actually, you can try the savory tofu pudding, no need. The sweet tofu pudding is clearly the best." Irina immediately turned him down before walking toward the door as she said, "I have to make a trip to the Grey Temple. I'll come back tonight to visit Amy before I leave." Mag opened his mouth, but only said one word in the end. "All right." After Irina disappeared from the restaurant, Meg looked around at the empty restaurant with a hint of loneliness in his heart. Right at this moment, someone knocked on the door. Meg walked over to open the door, and Yarbemia, Elizabeth, and Firis' eyes all lit up at the sight of Meg. "Boss, you're back." Yarbemia was elated. Elizabeth and Phyris also heaved a sigh of relief. We've searched the entire Chaos City for you, and we thought something had happened to you. Why didn't you say anything before disappearing? Yarbemia's concern was tinged with a hint of resentment, as if she were lecturing a runaway child. Meg could sense everyone's concern, and a warm feeling welled up in his heart. An apologetic smile appeared on his face as he said, I went out to do something today, and I thought I'd be done before noon. I didn't think I'd be so late, so I didn't inform you in advance. I'm glad you're all right. A smile quickly appeared on Yarbemia's face as she pointed at Phyris, and said, You know, when you weren't here this afternoon, the customers lined up early, and it was Phyris's roast beef kebabs that saved the day. They were all full of praise for her. It seems that Phyllis's roast beef kebabs can already stand on their own. This is really good news. Mag looked at Phyris with a hint of approval in his eyes. This little maid of Irina's was indeed astonishingly talented in cooking. Mr. Meg praised me. Phyllis blushed and stuttered, I only learned a little bit of the boss's skills. Hey, why are there so many plates? Did a guest come by? Yarbemia was a little surprised to see the stacked plates on the table when she entered. There were all kinds of plates, and they were used to hold different dishes. The plates on the table were very complete, and almost all the dishes on the menu had been served. Oh, I just came back and felt hungry, so I made some food for myself. Meg chuckled as he picked up the savory tofu pudding on the table and took 2 bites. Come to think of it, he was indeed a little hungry. But there's so much food. Yarbemia was still a little perplexed. Meg carried the tofu pudding into the kitchen as he said to Phyllis, Phyllis, we have to start preparing the ingredients. Most of the customers who came for lunch today are very disgruntled, so it's best to prepare more ingredients for dinner tonight so that more customers can have a good meal. All right. Phyllis hurriedly followed Meg into the kitchen and began to prepare the ingredients according to his instructions. All right, looks like boss really is starving. Yarbemia didn't ask any further questions, and began to clean up the table. In the conference room of the Grey Temple headquarters, a silhouette appeared without a sound. Roland, who was staring at the map on the wall, suddenly turned around and looked at Irina, who had appeared in the conference room. He was a little surprised, and said, Princess Irina? What are you doing here? Irina looked at Roland with a smile, and said, I missed my old friend, so I came to visit. Can't I? Little Grey, we haven't seen each other for 3 years. Don't tell me you don't even recognize me as your old friend. Roland's mouth twitched. If his subordinates heard the nickname Little Grey, they would probably laugh like crazy. It was really not compatible with his identity as the Lord of the Grey Temple, but this person just had to be Princess Irina. Even the City Lord had been given the nickname of Iron Muscle by her. What else could he do? You don't have the time to visit your old friend now, do you? Aren't you afraid that something might happen in the forest when you leave? Roland said to Irina helplessly. That old witch Helena and that idiot Borge are busy arguing now. They wouldn't even think that I would leave. Besides, I'm only leaving for a while, so you don't have to worry. Irina waved her hand nonchalantly. I heard you got an underground cavern from the goblins. Seems like you're serious this time. Seems like the relationship between Chaos City and the goblins is better than I thought. I just got that underground cavern today, and you already know about it. What are you doing here today? Roland asked Irina, and didn't talk about the goblins. It's not very convenient for me to go to the Dragon Island, so I'm going to use Chaos City to send a notice. Irina took out the letter she wrote earlier, and tossed it to Roland casually. Roland received the letter, opened it, and read it with a serious expression. After a while, he looked at Irina, and said, Are you sure you want to send this notice? Yes. Do you know that if this notice is sent out, both Helena and Borge will definitely point their spears at you? The underground cavern is not an indestructible fortress. I want the world to hear our voice, and let more elves know what we're doing. Resistance by force is expected. Planting the seed of freedom in more elves' hearts is our goal, Irina said with a smile. As for the result, it's enough to work hard for it. Roland stared at Irina for a long time, and finally put that letter away solemnly. If there are elves in Chaos City who are willing to go to the underground cavern, I will provide them with the necessary convenience. At least no one can control their choice. Thank you. I'll ask him to chase you down 2 streets less next time, Irina said with a smile. A green light flashed, and disappeared without a trace. These 2 fellows really don't give in to each other. Roland shook his head, and walked out of the meeting room. After this notice from Irina was sent out, the commotion it caused was not any smaller than the one from Alex in the morning. It was also a piece of news that was enough to shake the Norland continent. Is father back? Where did he go this afternoon? Should I record this abnormal behavior in my little notebook and tell big sister Irina? Amy mumbled with a conflicted expression on the way home from school. Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1057. Madam. Are you all right? The black cat used its sharp claws to drag Camilla down from the wall and asked as it undid the spirit-binding rope. Who is that woman? How dare she hit my pretty face with a chair? Ouch. It hurts. Camilla covered her face and complained. I didn't see anything before I was knocked out. The black cat said with some lingering fear. Although it was not very powerful, its perception and speed were comparable to that of a 7th-level magical beast. However, it was knocked out before it could see anything. Although her face was covered, that woman gave me a familiar feeling, like I've seen her somewhere before. Who could she be? And what was the last thing she said? Camilla patted her head, but it was as if she had drunk too much. The only thing she could remember before she fainted was that woman in a white dress and a veil hat and a chair approaching her quickly. Madam, could that woman be here to save Mr. Mac? Maybe he knows something. The black cat said carefully. That guy. Camilla's gaze fell on the red spirit binding rope on the ground, and her mind immediately recalled the shameful binding and the whip on her body. Why did I have such a big reaction? I'm a noble. How could I have a reaction to a whip? And, he's a man, a dirty man. Camilla's heart was in a mess. What happened today had completely overturned her usual style and understanding. The binding that was like a tortoise's shell, the cracking sound of the whip on her body, the bright red candle, all of this seemed to have opened the door to a new world. Madam, are we going to look for him now? The black cat asked carefully. No. Camilla shook her head firmly. I'm a little tired today. I'll settle the score with him tomorrow. The rope had been tied up for a long time, and now she only felt that her legs were sore and weak. She just wanted to go back and lie down. She did not know if that woman was still by Meg's side. It was not that she was afraid of her, but if she went to look for her in this state, she would most likely be knocked out by a chair. That would be too embarrassing. All right. The black cat heaved a sigh of relief. There was a long line at the entrance of Mammoth again. The popularity of the leaderboard dominating incident had decreased by quite a bit, but it was still a hot topic. However, compared to the initial one-sided questioning, after many passers-by tried Mammoth food, they immediately became Mammoth fans. They spontaneously defended and spoke up for Mammoth, causing Mammoth's reputation to skyrocket. Moreover, after many customers tried the restaurants according to the rankings, they did find some delicacies hidden in the many restaurants. This caused the gourmet rankings, which was originally doubted by many, to rise in popularity. It began to become an important aid for many people to find delicacies. Mammoth's high prices made many customers flinch. However, there were still many delicious and inexpensive delicacies on the list that were highly sought after by foodies. On the second floor of Sith Restaurant, the restaurant manager looked at the long line outside the restaurant. He looked a little excited at the skinny middle-aged man dressed in a chef's uniform beside him and said, "Boss, we haven't opened for business yet, but there are already customers lining up outside the restaurant." Moreover, they all specifically ordered freshwater seafood soup. Finally, more customers know about our restaurant. Your insistence on making the best freshwater seafood soup for so many years was not in vain. The river has frozen over these days, so it's not easy to fish for freshwater seafood. Tomorrow, we have to discuss with the fishermen. Even if the price is higher, we have to let them cut through the ice to fish. Otherwise, The customers will definitely be disappointed when they don't get to eat the freshwater seafood soup, the man said with a smile. Boss, if you ask me, we can secretly buy some farmed freshwater seafood. Anyway, the taste won't be too different. The manager lowered his voice and said, cutting through the ice to fish, those fishermen will definitely demand an exorbitant price. If we don't raise the price of the freshwater seafood soup, I'm afraid we will suffer a loss. No, using freshly caught freshwater seafood is our tradition and also our signature. If we use farmed freshwater seafood, wouldn't we be smashing our own signature? We can't do this kind of thing. The boss shook his head decisively. His tone was firm and there was no room for negotiation. The manager opened his mouth and did not mention this matter again. After a while, he said with some indignation, in order to make this soup, we have been constantly improving and persisting for more than 10 years. What right does that mammoth have to suppress us? I heard that the dish is not a soup at all. It's just some soup in it. Isn't it obvious that they deliberately raised it to first place? The fact that the freshwater seafood soup can be raised to second place on the rankings shows that the judging this time is quite fair. That mammoth can dominate the 6 rankings. He must have his own unique points. The boss shook his head and appeared rather indifferent. If he really has the ability, then so be it. I just can't stand those fellows who rely on underhanded means to get to the top. We almost reached the top. The manager was still unconvinced. He looked at the boss and said, Boss, let's go challenge Mammoth. Let's take back the first place on the soup rankings fair and square. This matter. The boss was a little hesitant. It would be a lie to say that he did not care at all. After so many years of adhering to this ancestral freshwater seafood soup and constantly researching and improving it, it finally received attention because of the gourmet cuisine rankings. Although there was only a difference of 1 place between second place and first place, it had a completely different meaning. Father, where did you go this afternoon? Little Amy was so worried about you. Besides, I didn't have anything to eat at noon. Although it's late to eat Sister Bean Sprout's roast beef kebabs, I'm still so hungry. Amy threw herself into Meg's arms as soon as she entered the door. She asked softly with a somewhat scrutinizing gaze. I went to do something, so I didn't make it back in time. I'll make something delicious for Amy tonight, Meg said with a smile. Okay. Hearing that there was something delicious to eat, Amy's eyes lit up and she nodded her little head. Meg took a look at the long line outside the restaurant and did not see any trace of Irina. However, it made sense. She had eaten so much in the afternoon, so she shouldn't be hungry now. After the busy evening business hours, Meg waved goodbye to the ladies at the door. He stood at the door and looked around, but did not see any trace of Irina. He couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. Father, are you waiting for someone? Amy asked Meg curiously as she hugged Ugly Duckling. Yes, I'm waiting for someone. She should be here. Meg nodded. Seeing that there was no one around, he turned around and prepared to go in and wait. Apart from Phyllis and Gina, there are many other women. An 8th-tier frost dragon, a 7th-tier elf, a 7th-tier spatial magic caster, a half-dragon, and a little elf are all obediently waiting on you. Should I praise you? A slightly jealous voice sounded from behind. Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1058. Meg froze. As a qualified boss, he really only recruited these employees for the sake of the restaurant's benefits and efficiency. Now that he thought about it, they were indeed worthy of praise. However, he only dared to think about that in his heart. There was no other restaurant with such a lineup of service staff in the entire Norland continent, let alone in Chaos City. It was indeed a little strange. And every single one of them was a beautiful young lady. Well, except for Shirley. But to be honest, it was very rare to find a young lady who was prettier than Shirley. As the boss of a restaurant, it wouldn't be right to say that he didn't have any problems recruiting such a batch of service staff. What should I do? I'm anxious. I'm waiting online. Meg's forehead started to sweat. Big sister Irina, why are you here? I missed you so much. Amy tossed Ugly Duckling aside before jumping into Irina's arms with elation. She struggled to pull her face out of Irina's soft bosom, and looked at her with surprise and elation in her eyes. Irina hugged Amy, and her gaze became gentle. She smiled, and said, "Of course I'm here to see Amy. I haven't seen you for 2 months, and you've grown a little taller. Oh, and you've become prettier too. You're like me in this aspect." "Really? Then, will Amy be as pretty as big sister Irina when she grows up?" Amy asked in surprise. "No, there will only be one as pretty as me." Irina shook her head. Huh. Remi widened her eyes and felt that her young heart had been hurt. Meg also raised his eyebrows. He didn't expect her to be so mean to Amy. Irina also felt Amy's hurt. She thought for a while, and comforted her with a smile. "It's all right. Although you're not as pretty as me, you'll still be prettier than the others. Millimeter, that's good. Then, when I grow up, big sister Irina will be old. I'll still be the prettiest." Amy smiled again. Irina stared. She didn't expect the little fellow to hold onto the sharp blade of age and stab her in the back. She is indeed his biological daughter. Looking at the two who were hurting each other, Meg's lips curled into a smile, giving off a different kind of warmth. "It's cold outside, come in and have a seat." Meg opened the door and said with a smile. Irina carried Amy into the house. Ugly Duckling looked at Irina in a cowardly manner. It wanted to go up to her, but it was too scared to move. The door of the restaurant closed, shutting out the cold as well. "Are you hungry? Do you want something to eat?" Meg looked at Irina and asked. Irina thought for a moment and said, "I want to eat grilled fish, beef kebabs, and a beggar's chicken. That's about it for now." "Okay." Meg nodded and turned to walk into the kitchen. Father only asked big sister Irina if she wants to eat, and didn't even ask Amy if she wants to eat. "Mph, I'm no longer your little baby. You don't love me anymore." Amy pouted and said aggrievedly. Meg turned around and looked at the jealous little fellow. He smiled and asked, "Then, Amy, do you want to eat supper? Father will make whatever you want to eat." Amy smiled and hugged Irina's arm as she happily said, "I want to eat the same as big sister Irina. I want to eat with her. Good girl." Irina pinched Amy's face. "Okay, I'll make it for you." Meg nodded and walked into the kitchen. Once Meg entered the kitchen, Irina was already looking at Amy with a smile. "Amy, in the 2 months that we haven't met, did your father sleep with other big sisters? Kiss them? Hugging? Or suddenly disappear in the middle of the night? Strange noises coming from next door? Did he receive any strange letters?" Amy ran to the counter and took out a little black book as she said with a smile, "About that, I have a little notebook that records everything. A beautiful and generous mother and cute daughter flipping through a little black book together." The scene of a loving mother and a filial daughter was so warm and beautiful. But Meg, who was in the kitchen, saw this scene, and even his hand that was holding the kitchen knife trembled slightly. The book in Amy's hand was the real death note. He didn't know what the little fellow had recorded in it, but before he could check it, it had already fallen into Irina's hands. "This time, I'm probably dead, right?" Meg lamented in his heart. It was all his fault that he didn't expect Irina to suddenly come. He didn't have time to bribe Amy and was really caught off guard. "What are you looking at? Let's eat the grilled fish first." Meg came out with the grilled fish and pretended that he didn't know anything. He secretly glanced at Amy's little notebook from the corner of his eyes. He had to make some preparations in advance and try to get as round as possible. "It smells so good." Irina closed the book. Unexpectedly, she didn't fall out with him on the spot. There was even a hint of a smile at the corner of her mouth. "Fuck, that's too scary, right? Could it be that she's preparing some big move? Or is she going to finish this meal before sending me on my way?" Meg blinked and looked at Irina, who casually picked up a piece of fish with her chopsticks and put it in Amy's bowl. He couldn't figure out what was going on, and his heart was in a panic. This wasn't as good as a direct storm. At least he didn't need to be so nervous. "You're not eating?" Irina asked curiously as she took a bite of the fish and looked at Meg, who was standing awkwardly by the table. "Yes, father. You should eat too." Amy sucked a strand of vermicelli into her mouth and swayed her body happily. Okay. Meg sat down beside Amy a little cautiously and looked at the mother and daughter who were happily eating. He didn't know what they were up to, so he simply steeled himself and picked up his chopsticks to eat the grilled fish. Forget it. Even if I'm going to die, I'll eat my fill before I go on my way. After eating the grilled fish, Meg went to grill a bunch of beef kebabs. Irina picked up a beef kebab and took a bite. She looked up at Meg and said, "I want to drink." Okay. Meg went into the kitchen and came out with 2 large glasses of beer. He placed one in front of Irina and the other in front of himself. After coming to this world, he rarely drank, but he wanted to drink a few glasses with her tonight. The spicy and delicious grilled beef kebab paired with the cold beer was finished in just a few bites. The large glass of beer was also finished in just a few mouthfuls, leaving only a little foam hanging on the sides of the glass. Then, it was quickly refilled. After downing 3 large mugs of beer in a row, Irina's cheeks were already a little flushed. She raised her mug to the light, and a joyful smile appeared on her face as she looked at the translucent amber beer. This beer is so delicious, it's perfect when paired with this kebab. Meg looked at the drunk Irina and smiled. He clinked his glass with hers and said softly, "Cheers." Cheers. Irina picked up her glass and finished it in a few mouthfuls. She then asked Meg to refill her glass. After drinking countless glasses, the drunk Irina finally fell asleep on the table. Amy also fell asleep on her lap. Phew, she's finally drunk. Meg breathed a sigh of relief. Even with his alcohol tolerance, he still felt a little dizzy when he stood up after drinking so much beer. But, what should I do now? Where should she sleep? Meg looked at the drunk Irina and felt a headache coming on. He thought for a long time. It shouldn't be a problem if we sleep together, right? Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1059. Meg carried Amy and Irina upstairs. Because the little one kept hugging her hand, he thought for a while and decided not to separate them. Instead, he put them on the big bed. Looking at Irina, who was hugging Amy naturally and smiling contentedly, Meg's lips curled into a smile. His mood suddenly became very peaceful. In this small room, the combination of the family of 3 made him feel inexplicably at ease. However, he knew that this scene could only last for one night at most. Since Irina had already embarked on the path of rebelling against the wind forest, she had to continue on this path. He was still far from being able to shelter her from the wind and rain, and he couldn't say anything to make her stay. "System, if I need your help to overthrow the wind forest's rule, how much would it cost?" Meg asked silently in his heart. "Even if I sold you, it wouldn't be enough," the system said disdainfully. Meg raised his eyebrows. He was just asking casually. The system seemed to have many restrictions when it came to helping. He definitely couldn't do something that would affect the entire continent. After looking at the bed for a while and tucking in the corner of the blanket, Meg turned around, went downstairs, and went into the kitchen to get busy. An hour later, Meg placed a large lunchbox on the first table by the stairs. Then, he wrote a piece of paper and stuck it on it. Meg took a shower and changed into a set of pajamas. Looking at the bottle of perfume in the corner, he hesitated for a while before picking it up. "Amy is my daughter, and Irina is Amy's mother. If that's the case, it shouldn't be a problem for me to sleep on this bed, right? There are only 2 beds in this room. The small bed is too short, and I can't even fit my legs. The big bed is the only choice. Moreover, this is my house, my bed." Meg stood by the bed and muttered with some hesitation. Meow Tilda Ugly Duckling, who couldn't climb onto the bed, stood by Meg's feet and looked up at him pitifully. "All right, Ugly Duckling, you sleep on the small bed, and I'll sleep on the big bed. That's settled." Meg immediately made a decision. He grabbed Ugly Duckling and put it on the small bed, while he lay down on the edge of the big bed about half a meter away from Irina. "This is the first time I feel that going to bed is such an exciting thing." Mag was as straight as a salted fish as he stared at the ceiling. He could feel the figure lying not far away from him, and his little heart was thumping rapidly. Mag took a deep breath to adjust his emotions and tried to calm himself down. Although he wasn't an innocent virgin, he was still lying on the bed. He was a saint. After a while, Meg, who still didn't feel sleepy, couldn't help but turn his head sideways to look at Irina. A ray of light shone in from the window. The soft silk quilt made an alluring curve with her breasts. But for some reason, he still carefully put the note away. Just as he was about to put it on the counter, he found Amy's little notebook. What kind of bad things did she write in there? Why didn't she get angry after reading it? Meg curiously picked up the little notebook and secretly flipped through it. This morning, Father made me delicious rainbow fried rice. For lunch, we had steak and roast beef kebabs. For dinner, we had super spicy grilled fish. I had a lot of fun eating today. Today, Father made delicious braised pork with soy sauce and helped a poor grandpa to draw for him to find his lost child. If I'm lost, Father will draw me very well, right? Yes, of course. After all, I'm so good looking. Today, a mermaid sister suddenly appeared in the dining hall. She fainted before she could say anything. Father and I carried her upstairs to the bathtub. Father added a lot of sea salt to the water so that she could survive. She drank so much salt water. If she were to be made into a grilled mermaid, would there be no need to add salt? Chapter 1060. Ugly Duckling has gotten fatter again. There's so much meat on its tummy now. Although it feels nice to touch, I think we should be able to eat our own roast duck if it continues to grow like this. This is my daughter. Meg looked at the diary in his hands, and was so touched that he was about to cry. He finally understood why Irina didn't have any reaction after reading the diary yesterday, and was even quite nice to him. How was this a death note? This was a diary of a foodie through and through. Furthermore, the little fellow had successfully molded him into a kind and principled man. All right, I'll add an extra egg for breakfast today, and I'll arrange for whatever she wants to eat in the future. It's not too much to spoil such a precious daughter, Meg muttered to himself with a smile as he put the little black diary back into the cupboard. Did big sister Irina and father sleep together yesterday? Then, how should I write it down today? Amy opened her eyes and looked at the little bird made of grass and the big empty bed. She thought for a while, but soon shook her head. Forget it. Let's think about what to eat for breakfast. Should it be rainbow fried rice or braised chicken and rice? Early in the morning, a notice posted outside the 8 city gates of Chaos City quickly attracted the attention of the residents, and then spread to all parts of the Norland continent rapidly. I, Irina. In the name of freedom, I've formed the Night Elves. I'm determined to overthrow the rule of the Wind Forest family, and build a real elven paradise. I won't give up until I achieve my goal. The notice didn't have many words, but it was like a stone that caused 1,000 ripples. The discord in the elven race had been spreading for a long time. It started after Princess Irina was deposed. However, no one expected Princess Irina to suddenly announce the formation of a new organization, the Night Elves, and was determined to overthrow the current rule of the elven race. She even announced it in Chaos City and to the whole continent. And it was only a day after Alex's response. In just 2 days, 3 things happened that shook the entire continent, and made many people think of the relationship between Alex and Irina. A few years ago, as long as one of them was mentioned, people would inevitably think of the other. They could be said to be the representatives of toughness. There was no place on the Norland continent that they didn't dare to go, and no one that they didn't dare to beat up. The 2 level 10 pinnacle masters, the god of swords Alex with unparalleled swordsmanship, and the goddess Irina with heaven-defying magic, had finally returned. Although the 2 of them did not form a team this time, once the news spread, it still shook the entire continent. In a large hall in the Wind Forest, Borge looked at the letter he had just received with a stiff expression. He kicked the table in front of him and angrily said, "That bitch Irina, how dare she come to Chaos City and say that she's going to defeat us? Gather the troops. Today, I will personally destroy her and those traitors. My lord, the High Priestess is watching us. I'm afraid it's not appropriate to send troops." An elf said hesitantly, "Shut up. That old witch Helena must also want to kill Irina right now. Borge gritted his teeth with a cold smile, and said, "This is the eve of the signing of the peace treaty. If we don't destroy these traitors as soon as possible, the elves will be at a disadvantage in the negotiations. That old witch will definitely not let that happen." In the starry cave, Helena was also looking at the letter in her hand. A ball of blue flame rose up, and burned the letter into white ashes. "Irina, I thought you were a smart person, but it seems like I was wrong. Your stupidity is incurable." Helena looked at the brightest star in the cave with furrowed brows, and said, "Since that's the case, for the sake of the elves' interests and future, I have no choice but to kill you. If the queen can still come out of seclusion, I believe she will also understand me." The three big powers of Chaos City gathered again. Roland's brows furrowed, and said, "What should we do this time? The elves are already in a mess internally. The peace treaty has not started yet, and it has already become an unstable factor. Isn't that a good thing? The internal chaos will take away most of their energy. Once they are unable to destroy this rebellion quickly, they won't be able to make any strong demands in the peace treaty," Michael said with a smile. "Yes. With Princess Irina's ability, Alex's support, and the complex underground caverns provided by the goblins, the elves should be able to continue this rebellion for some time. There might even be a chance of success. This isn't a bad thing." Novan nodded with a smile. "Now that you put it that way, it does make sense." Roland thought about it carefully, and nodded slightly. "Since that's the case, we have to do something to make Irina's night elves last a little longer. As long as the elves in Chaos City are willing to join the night elves, we will let them go to the underground caverns. At the same time, we will send them some rations and battle supplies through the goblins. At least, we can ensure that they won't be destroyed easily. Won't this make us weaker? If it comes to the time when even Chaos City needs to join the battle, this little increase in strength won't matter anymore. The leader of the night elves is carrying such a heavy burden on her shoulders. This woman is really big-hearted," Meg mumbled to himself helplessly after hearing about the contents of the announcement. She didn't mention anything about doing such a big thing to him last night. It seemed like she didn't want him to be involved in this. However, with his ability, he really couldn't help her much now. If his identity was exposed, he would become a target for everyone, and become a burden instead. Night elves. The princess. She's fine. And she wants to overthrow the rule of the forest. Firis rushed to the city gate immediately after hearing the news. Her eyes reddened when she saw the announcement, and she was so agitated that even her body was trembling slightly. This was the first time she heard about the princess after coming to Chaos City. "The princess must need me very much now. Without me, she might not be able to eat her fill. I have to go back to her side." Firis' gaze quickly became determined, and she turned to walk towards the restaurant. "Mr. Meg, I'm sorry. I might have to resign," Firis said to Meg, who was putting on an apron, as soon as she entered. "Resign? Firis, what's wrong with you? Why are you resigning all of a sudden?" Meg looked at Firis with surprise. They got along quite well during this period of time. Although this lass didn't like to talk, she was efficient and a fast learner. At this speed, she would be able to become a chef on her own very soon. "Actually, there's something I haven't told you." Firis looked at Meg with a hint of hesitation. Chapter 1061. Meg looked at Phyllis, and suddenly panicked. Could this lass be? "Actually, I am the elven princess's maidservant. She needs me now, so I have to go to her side and help her." Phyllis looked at Meg with a determined expression. Meg raised his eyebrows. Luckily, it wasn't what he thought. Looking at the apologetic Phyllis, he wanted to laugh in his heart. He was the one who brought this maiden to Chaos City, and now she was feeling guilty because she didn't reveal her identity. However, it seemed like Phyllis had seen the announcement, and that was why she was so anxious to resign and return to Irina's side. She knew the danger, but she didn't hesitate at all. Meg was touched by her loyalty. The Night Elves' current situation wasn't optimistic. A rebel team that was put together in a short period of time, and most of them were slave elves with lower power, wanted to overthrow the deep-rooted and powerful the Wind Forest. It was no different from ants trying to shake a tree. I have heard some things about the elves and Princess Irina. If you insist on returning to her side to help her, I won't stop you. Meg looked at Phyllis. Irina indeed needed someone who could take care of her. However, before you leave, I want you to think about 2 questions. Do you know where to find the princess? If you really find her, how can you help her, or be a burden? Phyllis opened her mouth. She thought for a while, and then shook her head dejectedly. The princess is definitely not in the Wind Forest anymore. I don't know where to find her, either. However, I think I can take care of her. She doesn't know how to cook, but she is a little picky when it comes to food. She would rather starve than eat something she isn't used to. Mag thought back to how Irina had finished the entire menu on her own the previous afternoon, and he was feeling rather disgruntled. Firis was clearly right. She most likely hadn't had a proper meal by herself in a very long time. If you want to take care of her, or play a role in the rebel army, I think you should learn faster and more cooking techniques and dishes. The dishes you cooked in the past were too delicate. You only ate 1 bite of each dish, which was not suitable to provide enough energy for the soldiers during wartime. If you want, I can teach you how to make Yangju fried rice and Laji rujiamo. During this time, I will also help you find out the princess's location. As long as you can confirm their location and ensure their safety, you can go there at any time. Meg looked at Phyllis seriously. How could he not feel sorry for the mother of his child? If it weren't for the fact that the situation didn't allow it, he would have gone to the front lines to cook for her. Although Phyllis was an excellent cook, if she was willing to cook for Irina, he would feel more at ease. Naturally, he would not force her to stay. Mr. Meg. Phyllis looked at Meg with tears in her eyes. He was so nice to her that he was willing to do so many things for her. No one had ever treated her like this except for the princess. Seeing the tears in Phyllis's eyes, Meg thought that he had been too harsh. He quickly said, "If you are in a hurry to leave now, I can go to the mayor's mansion and ask. Maybe they have some information." "No, Mr. Meg, you are right. I should become a useful person, not a burden to the princess, like last time when she was worried about my safety, but it was useless." Phyllis shook her head and looked at Meg firmly. "Please teach me how to cook." A smile appeared on Meg's face. He nodded and said, "Okay, then let's start with this morning's break. I will teach you how to make Yangju fried rice." "Okay." Phyllis nodded hard. "Mr. Meg, I may have to resign. If I leave this time, I hope you can help me take care of Anna for a while. If I can't come back, I hope you can help me take good care of her." Shirley also came to the restaurant earlier than usual. She glanced at Anna, who was playing with Ugly Duckling with Amy outside the restaurant, and said to Meg with a serious expression, "You are leaving too?" Meg raised his eyebrows. He was surprised, but also within his expectations. Shirley and Sally were both nobles in the elven race. Meg knew that very well. However, they were different from those elves who had a rigid mindset and social class structure. They had fought for the freedom of the lower-class elves. Shirley even took Anna in. Irina's announcement was actually a call to arms for the elves who were roaming the Norland continent. Fight for freedom. What a noble and true goal. The elves who had been persecuted for many years and yearned for freedom would probably be fired up when they saw this announcement. "Yes. My brethren need me." Shirley nodded without any hesitation. Meg looked at Shirley. This elf who was prettier than most women was gradually becoming more important in his heart. "You can leave any time. I will take care of Anna. She will have whatever Amy has." Meg nodded. "Thank you." A smile appeared on Shirley's face. She looked around the restaurant, and said, "I'll bid my farewells here. As for the others, please say goodbye for me." Meg looked at Shirley, and nodded slightly. "I'll bid my farewells here. Take care." Shirley turned and walked out of the door. Meg looked outside. Shirley squatted down and hugged Anna clumsily. She whispered a few words into her ear before getting up and leaving. The little girl's eyes were red as she clutched the corner of her shirt tightly. "I will come back after the war ends. I will still take care of you then. Shirley turned back and smiled at Anna. Anna looked at Shirley. Her nose twitched, and she extended her pinky. Pinky promise. You must come back. Okay. Shirley extended her pinky and hooked it with Anna's pinky. Pinky promise. 100 years. Don't change your mind, Anna said seriously. Shirley retracted her hand, raised her delicate chin, and said with a smile, Don't worry. A beautiful person like me won't lie. With that, she turned and strode away, waving her hand with her back facing the restaurant. Anna looked at Shirley's back and started sobbing. What's going on? Why is there such a strong sandstorm today? Shirley blinked. She quickened her pace and soon disappeared from the square. It's okay, Miss Anna. You still have us. Amy walked over and hugged Anna gently. She reached out to wipe away the tears on her face, and said with a smile, I heard that good-looking people don't die easily. Miss Shirley is so good-looking. You won't die easily. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.